Number 10. Blackheath. Blackheath is Samuel Smithers. Yep, in the reality of 1610, Plant Man is instead a mutant. His powers are similar to that of Poison Ivy, allowing him to control plant life. Blackheath was one of the mutants who was kept in William Stryker's camps. While there, he ended up meeting and befriending Storm, and would be one of the few mutants left when Utopia came about. Number 9. Mach 2. Mach 2 is Nomi Bloom. She is kind of like the second coming of Magneto, but not as much of a villain. Or at least, she comes around in the end. And not inherently as powerful as Magneto was. She can basically affect and control magnetic fields. Later on, she would see a power boost, which would enable her to have more control over objects containing metal. Mach 2 is also known for being a rival to Kitty in terms of her leadership over the surviving mutants of Utopia. People are going to be like, what is Utopia? And I'm going to be like, don't worry. We're getting to that much later, but it's coming. It's slowly you'll get little bits of information. Number 8. Zorn. In the reality of Earth 1610, Zorn is actually Zorn, but is not the only version of Zorn. Wow, that sounded confusing. What I mean to say is that Zorn is his own person, Kuan Yin, but has a sibling who is also named Zorn, but with a Z. They were each given their powers as part of the Southeast Asian Republic's Super Soldier program. Zorn with an X is the one who you typically see clad in the color white. He is an amazingly powerful telepath and telekinetic. While both characters may have been introduced later and have been somewhat short-lived, they are both presented as being pretty powerful during their time in the comics. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 7. Zorn. This is the sibling I was telling you about. Zorn with a Z or a Z is Shen Yin, the brother of Zorn with an X. His powers are much darker in nature. It's actually believed in the comics that Zorn and Zorn were sort of destined to bring a sense of balance to the world and mutant kind, symbolically sort of representing yin and yang, black and white. Zorn's powers are basically akin to a black hole. He emits a black hole energy and can use his powers to manipulate gravity. In the end, Zorn sacrifices himself when he realizes that he cannot win in the war against the Children of Tomorrow. In his death, he effectively becomes a black hole in retaliation. Number 6. Gregory Stark. Gregory Stark is the twin brother of Tony Stark. He has less morals than his brother and is a more focused intellectual. Whereas Tony is known for his lavish playboy lifestyle, Gregory is not. In fact, that is one of the many things that Gregory always hated about his brother. He is the older twin, being born 20 minutes before Tony, and is not only more amoral, but is also more intelligent than his brother. Initially, he worked for S.H.I.E.L.D., but this was all part of a carefully planned world domination plot involving in part the overthrowing of S.H.I.E.L.D. superiors, leading eventually to Gregory being put in charge as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Eventually, the Ultimates would learn of his plot and turn on him, defeating and killing him after the nanites in his bloodstream were disabled by his own brother, Tony. Number 5. Modi Thorson. Modi is the son of Thor and Hela. Don't worry, in Ultimates they're not related. Not brother and sister, nor uncle and niece. Still, it's kind of icky to imagine, but Thor was forced to sleep with Hela in order to give her a child so that in exchange she would return him to Earth so that he could be with Valkyrie. Of course, this didn't end up working out exactly as Thor had planned, because Valkyrie ended up dying and then Thor ended up coming back, so they didn't really get to be together, but hey, good try. When Modi was a child, Thor locked him away for his own protection, but gave him Mjolnir so that he'd be able to escape when he was worthy. After escaping the room he was locked up in, now fully grown, Modi ended up using the Mind Gem to bend others to his will. His plan was to destroy the US and basically rebuild Asgard out of its charred remains, because at this point in time Asgard had fallen, there was no Asgard. Modi even managed to bend his father to his will, but was not successful in controlling the mind of Captain America. In the end, Thor broke free of his son's will and killed him. Number 4. Green Goblin. Of course, Norman Osborn needs to be near the top on this list because, well, he's Norman Osborn. But in the reality of Earth 1610, he's actually even more fearsome than his 616 counterpart. Norman got his powers after learning of the creation of Spider-Man through an Oz formula infected spider. Believing that it was the combination of the Oz formula and spider DNA that granted those spider-like abilities, Norman theorized that combining the Oz formula with his own DNA should just transform him into a more superior version of himself. Unfortunately, it didn't quite work out how he planned, and instead, Norman found himself transformed into a demon-like version of himself. This version of Norman comes with super strength, speed, durability, and is virtually indestructible and immortal, in a way that's similar to the Hulk. Every time he dies, Osborn claims he is resurrected. Osborn would also eventually make his way to the universe of Earth 616. But how did he get there? Number 3, Ultimatum. Ultimatum is like the evil version of Miles Morales, but is actually the main continuity version of that character. While he isn't originally from Earth 1610, instead hailing from the Prime universe of Earth 616, Miles Morales did spend a good amount of time living on Earth 1610. And I mean, his current villain name is Ultimatum, so I feel like he kind of earned a place on our list. Miles was the one responsible for bringing the 1610 version of Norman Osborn to Earth 616, who works for him as his lackey, hence why Ultimatum is higher up on this list. Ultimatum himself doesn't have any superpowers, but does have quite a bit of influence, being an ally of Earth 616's Kingpin originally, and also possesses knowledge of the multiverse. I keep pointing to my head for knowledge. It's just like, yes, Amanda, we know this is where your brain is. We know. Ultimatum also has a pretty sweet suit. Like a supervillain suit, not like a tailored suit. His plan was to take over Brooklyn, make it his own criminal empire, and send the Miles Morales of Earth 1610, Spider-Man, and his family back to their home reality. Fortunately, his plan fell apart in issue 19 of Miles Morales Spider-Man, when he found out he was unable to capture Spider-Man's parents. They're not easy to capture, so I love that he was like, this will work fine. But Jefferson was like, no, get out of here. What are you trying to do? Get out of here. Number 2, Magneto. Speaking of Ultimatum. Okay, so while Green Goblin is mortal and Ultimatum is the boss of Green Goblin, and Magneto is, I mean, not necessarily immortal, definitely not immortal, he still has proven to be very deadly in the Ultimate Universe, and it is for that reason that he gets ranked so high up. I mean, just the numbers of lives he took is shocking during, of course, Ultimatum. Magneto killed Professor Xavier and other notable mutant heroes who stood in his way. He killed millions of people worldwide before S.H.I.E.L.D. and the X-Men were able to finally track him down and put a stop to it. Magneto then learned that his beliefs about mutant kind were wrong, and that mutants were created from the hereditary genes passed on from the super soldier serum. They weren't like divine in any way. This broke Magneto, destroying everything he had built his cause around, making him question everything he had done, as he should. In the end, Cyclops killed Magneto, vaporizing him with a powerful optic blast. See? Not immortal. Number 1, the Maker. Likely one of the most powerful and brilliant villains to come out of the Ultimate Universe. Jonathan Hickman, if you're watching this, you know what I'm talking about. The Maker is also a fan favorite among comic book writers and readers, so it's easy to understand how he ends up accomplishing so much and becoming so gifted. When we like a character, we want them to do well. When we like a villain, we want them to do bad. I mean, do bad things. To other people, that is. And the Maker in that way does not disappoint us. Initially, the Maker was known as Mr. Fantastic. He is the reimagining of Reed Richards if he were to turn to a life of villainy instead, which ends up happening after the Fantastic Four falls apart. Much of his power comes from his genius intellect and his fiercely and horrifically loyal dedication to the pursuit of knowledge and science. The Maker has his own modified symbiote, is virtually immortal, possesses a genius intellect, and still has his stretching powers. And he's done a lot of stuff. It's pretty crazy.
Number 10, Origins. Why not start at the beginning? Let's do it. Ultimate James Howlett first appeared in Ultimate X-Men issue 1 back in 2001. Now his combat days began as a paratrooper for the Canadian Army during World War II. He was part of the invasion of Sicily, and funny enough, that's actually where he met Private Nick Fury and Private Fisk. Now Fisk got hit by a bullet, and then the three of them were all taken away. They were captured, even though James was from a different unit. He was from Canada. He just got roped into it. So that's where they all got put into the Weapon X complex and were under experimentation by Dr. Abraham Cornelius. Now luckily, James got out of there. The other two though, they were tested on to become this new Captain America. They were the test subjects of the new serum. But if you want to hear more of that Ultimate side, check out one of our playlists. We explain quite a bit of it. So yeah, in the Ultimates, Nick Fury is a super soldier. How cool is that? But Wolverine got out of there. He didn't want to be part of it. Well, he kind of got out of there. He got really, really close until a stray bullet hit him last second, and then everybody was in shock as he healed himself. So they dragged him right back in and they're like, well, we got to do some tests. What's going on here? So we got this mutant ability down the road, whereas main Wolverine was just born a mutant. So Key difference right there. Number 9. Mutant Zero. So Dr. Cornelius was super into this guy, and then during these experiments, because obviously they wanted to pick him apart and see what the hell just happened, during these experiments they discovered this gene that when it's activated, gives you superpowers, basically. So he came up with the term for them. He called them mutants, which is a great word, gotta admit. And James Howlett was mutant number 1. Well, actually, mutant 0 was his term. Now, the genome was spread around the planet over time, causing a few more mutants to pop around, just a few of them. And also, those scientists who like to experiment on James and others, they got what was coming eventually, because a mutant boy down the road had some Weapon X scientists as parents, and when he found out how they were treating James and others, well, he took out both of his parents and set James free. Yeah, that little boy was Magneto. The Ultimates are sick. And before we continue on with this list, if you want to go ahead and give this video a thumbs up, that would be really helpful for us. Or if you're feeling good today, maybe you want to hit that subscribe button. I mean, no pressure, but it's right there. Thank you so much. Let's get right back to the video. Number 8, Weapon X. So yeah, that whole thing with Eric was a big deal, but Wolverine was actually recaptured later on, this time by Colonel John Wraith, who was not fond of mutants at this point. There were a few of them and he was like, okay, this has gotten out of hand. And at this point, John was also the new head of the Weapon X program. So they wiped Wolverine's memory and gave him the name Logan. And this is where things got real for James, more real than before. This is when he was tortured. The other guy who was there, who was also getting tortured, his name was Victor Creed. And Victor was getting on his nerves the whole time. And this was when the adamantium was bonded to Logan's skeleton. So a lot of things happened during this time as well at Weapon X. So he was a mindless brute, and things took a turn one mission when he was deployed in the desert during the Gulf War. The truck got ambushed and Wolverine was let loose. This insane, mindless mutant weapon. No big deal at all. So he wiped out everybody. He took out every single member except for one guy, Nick Fury. He didn't take him out, he saved his life and carried him all the way to base because part of him still remembered meeting him early on in his life. Nick Fury actually recognized him as well and then came back later to set him free. What goes around comes around. Number 7. Brotherhood of Mutant Supremacy. So Magneto, of course, becomes an evil ruler in this universe as well, and he and Charles once shared a dream about creating a safe haven for mutants called the Savage Land. But a few arguments later and a pole in the spine, and now Charles is in a wheelchair, they're not talking anymore. So now Magneto is full-on villain and he creates this Brotherhood of Mutant Supremacy, and his first idea was to recruit Wolverine and attack the Pentagon. And that Savage Land ends up becoming the new evil headquarters, not a paradise. So Magneto wanted to take out Charles for good this time, not just paralyze him. He wanted him gone, so he sent Wolverine to get the job done. So Wolverine was undercover the entire time. Quicksilver actually almost blew it at one point, but Wolverine came through and impressed the X-Men.
Number 6, Black Bolt. Black Bolt is already menacing over on Earth 616, at least I would say in modern comics he is, but on Earth 1610, he is really menacing. We see Black Bolt for an even shorter time than Crystal, but honestly it only adds to the mystery of the character, making him appear more intimidating. The colors by June Chung during his appearance in Ultimate Fantastic Four Annual Issue number 1 really help the character to pop as well, and the pencils by Jay Lee also add to the presence of his appearance. He might not say much, but he really doesn't need to here. This is a very muscular, dark, and yet blindingly bright Black Bolt with the white lines of his costume reminding me of lightning. Black Bolt simply appears basically to destroy Attilan so they might find a new secret home, as their current one in the Himalayas has been revealed to the FF, and you know, it's supposed to be secret. Aside from that, he also communicates how disappointed he is in Crystal. Honestly, I would not want this Black Bolt to be disappointed in me. I would be like walking on eggshells with him if he was like, I'm slightly disappointed in you, Amanda. Or, you know, just stared at me and looked disappointed, because he couldn't really say that. He can only shout, well, he does shout to destroy Attilan, basically, that he's disappointed, so there you go. Even the rebellious Crystal seems to be affected by Black Bolt's guilt tripping though, agreeing to remain with her people despite being offered a place among the humans and the Fantastic Four. I mean, he doesn't even shout to destroy Attilan. What am I saying? He like just says a word. That's also how powerful this version of him is. He's like, I'll just say a word, Crystal, your disappointment, and then it all just wipes away. Number 5, Medusa. Honestly, I would say pretty much all of the Inhumans at this point of the Ultimate Universe are the coolest versions around, hence why I have so many of them on this list, or at least, you know, one of the coolest versions of the Inhumans around. I would say the coolest though. I think they are the coolest. Medusa is no exception, possibly having my most favorite redesign when it comes to her character. The Medusa of Earth 1610 is still Black Bolt's queen, but seems to have been named for her familiarity and appearance to the Gorgon of Mythos. Medusa. This version of Medusa has snakes for hair. She also happens to be steadfastly loyal to her people. As I said before, we don't get to see too much of the Inhumans, but we do know that Medusa believes the Inhumans are basically superior to humans, and that distance should be maintained between their race and the humans in order to basically preserve their own culture and their own abilities. Medusa also expresses here that she has come to love her husband and accept him for who he is, despite the fact that he can never really show his love for her, at least not vocally, which apparently is like a really big thorn in her side because she seems to be very upset about it. She's like, Crystal, get over the fact that you don't want to hang out with us. Like, Black Bolt can't even talk to me, okay? If I can deal with that, you can deal with Maximus, okay? Let's just figure it out. Number 4, Hawkeye. Hawkeye actually has to be one of the coolest heroes in these comics, and no, I am not joking. The way they revamped this character was so impactful that the version of the character was a major influence on their MCU counterpart. When it came time to pen down what that Hawkeye would be like. Clint Barton in the comics is known for being a hot mess typically, but in the Ultimate Universe, he was much more secretive, but also had a family. Tragically, his family ends up being found and killed in the process of enemies trying to hunt him down. When he is captured and severely mistreated by said captors, what does he do? He doesn't hang his head, he doesn't give up, he escapes, using his fingernails, his freaking fingernails as weapons. It doesn't get more badass than that. This Hawkeye does not even need arrows to be a deadly threat. I don't often get to hype Hawkeye here on Top 10 Nerd, so I just want to say thank you Ultimate Universe for giving me an opportunity to do so, because I do like Clint Barton, but we don't often get to put him at the top of these lists, or near the top, so yay. Number 3, Miles Morales. I know this is kind of a hot take when it comes to Spider-Man. I know there's some people in the comments who are gonna be like, I think Peter Parker is the best version. And that's fine, that's fair enough. But I really love Miles Morales in this role. Now, we do also have a Peter Parker in the Ultimate Universe of 1610, but he doesn't really do much to stand out for me in comparison to his main continuity counterpart. And don't get me wrong, I do love Peter Parker, but Miles is kinda like a breath of fresh air in some ways in comparison to the age-old hero. Why? Well, Peter has a tendency to be like really hard on himself. And aside from that, he's surrounded by tragedy at times. Honestly, there are runs where it feels like every time Peter like turns a corner, a new tragedy might just be like awaiting him around that corner. Miles actually has a family still living, and while he did lose his mom in the Ultimate Universe, it never really felt like a constant, unresolved loss, like the death of Peter's Uncle Ben or his first love Gwen Stacy on Earth 616. And Rio, Miles' mom, is actually back now that the 1610 Miles has been permanently displaced, taking up residence in the 616 reality, and his family obviously is there with him. Miles also just has super cool powers. On top of much of what Peter has going on, Miles can also camouflage himself, and he has Venom Blast powers, so gotta give it to him, sorry. Number 2, Gwen Stacy. Gwen Stacy is such an underrated character in the Marvel Ultimate Universe. On the Earth of 616, Gwen is, well, she's dead. Or she's probably dead. She might be showing up again soon, apparently, but it's probably a clone or like a trick or something. I don't believe it's the original Gwen Stacy. She's been dead and gone for many years. I don't think she's ever really gonna come back. In the Ultimate Universe, Gwen also kinda dies, but also kinda doesn't. She's killed by Carnage, not an alien symbiote, but kind of a lab-made one in this reality, and in essence, her consciousness becomes merged with it, meaning that Carnage becomes Gwen, and Gwen becomes Carnage. So yeah, as freaky as that sounds, in the Ultimate reality, Gwen Stacy lives on as Carnage. It's freaky, and it's cool. Well, you might think this is the same as a clone Gwen in the 616 universe, it's not really. Because 1, she has the power of Carnage, and 2, she is an 100% exact biological duplicate who also possesses Gwen's mind up to the point of her death, which, you know, not all Gwen clones in 616 have, allowing Gwen to continue to grow and develop as she would have as a human, but simply with superpowers. Well, she only has superpowers for a bit, sadly. She has them until Eddie Brock's Venom assimilates Carnage, leaving her devoid of the symbiote and her powers going forward. I kinda wish she had stayed as Carnage, but it's fine. When she was Carnage though, I think that was super cool. Even though I know it was freaking her out, I thought she could have maybe become the new Carnage. That would have been neat. Number 1, The Maker. The Maker is the alternate version of Reed Richards. I actually have always felt that Richards might make a better villain than a hero, and The Maker seems to have been this thought made manifest. Living proof. Well, you know, fictional living proof. The Maker initially started out as a hero, leader of the team known as the Fantastic Four. However, in the Ultimate Universe, his and Sue's future of marital bliss was not as much guaranteed. And in fact, after the tragedy of Ultimatum and Sue Storm turning down his marriage proposal, Richards got a different perspective on life, which inevitably turned him into a villain. In this universe, Reed had a rough childhood, and part of where his villainy started was in turning on his family. A family that had mistreated him, as he saw it, for years. Yeah, in this reality, Reed commits patricide and matricide to get back at his parents. Very counter to his Earth 616 alternate, and that version's relationship with his family, which much better than this one. And speaking of knowledge, let's get counting. Number 10, Marvel's Lifeline. One of the best things about the Ultimate line was what it did for Marvel as a company and a publisher. It provided a lifeline to Marvel at a time when it needed it the most. The comics industry bubble that once had made collectibles so valuable had burst. The hype and demand of the early 90s had vanished completely, leaving Marvel with tons of comics printed that would simply not sell. With the demand gone and production costs putting them into the red, Marvel was forced to sell off licenses to some of their best characters. This is how Sony got the rights to Spider-Man and how Fox got the rights to X-Men. And it's what prompted Marvel to change things up and create the Ultimate Universe. The Ultimate Universe was meant to be something fresh and new, free of continuity and ultimately more gritty, realistic, and with an edge. Amazingly, the new line of Ultimate Comics did well. So well that it provided Marvel with the stability it needed to recover. Without the Ultimate line, it's possible that we might not have the Marvel stories, animated series, films, or comics of today. That's how successful and important Ultimates was. Number 9, The Inhumans. I've said it before and I will say it again, I think the design of the Inhumans is much better on Earth 1610. They look more compelling and intimidating. Nothing against the 616 Inhumans, who I also like just fine, but I actually want to get to know these Inhumans more. Overall, I think the Ultimate Inhumans are a little more interesting than their main continuity counterparts. Number 8, no previous continuity. One of the best things that the Ultimate Universe and line offered readers was a fresh start, meaning that years and years of comic book history didn't really apply here. The idea was you didn't have to know what had gone on in the past or what was going on currently in the comics to just jump into a book, with comic book continuity being a concept that many new readers still find daunting today. This was freeing for consumers because it meant you could buy in without having to worry about potentially being confused because something from 20 years prior came up that you needed to understand in order to know what was really going on in the story. This wasn't the case for Earth 1610. At least, it wasn't the case to begin with. Freedom from continuity meant more creative freedom for writers, but unfortunately, Ultimates really only started as new reader accessible, but quickly became bogged down with intricate storytelling and details. It even ended up having retcons as well, which might confuse readers jumping in later on, with the first Ultimate Iron Man series being so out there that Marvel decided to retcon it out of existence, instead turning it into a ridiculous anime show set in the same universe, but that wasn't actually considered to be the true story of Iron Man. So that comic basically became like non-canon. Number 7, Sue and Reed splits. Finally, this reality is one where Sue seems to be more aware that Reed can never really fully commit to her. He proposes right before Ultimatum goes down, and they are faced with a giant wave as a result. Sue manages to push the wave back, but slips into a comatose state as a result, prompting Reed to go out looking to punish the villains and abandoning Sue, leaving her with the Thing, aka Ben Grimm. In the Ultimate Universe, Reed and Sue actually don't end up together in the end. In fact, Sue, after she's revived, finds out about a sinister plot of Reed's, realizing that he has become a villain. Ben attempts to try and explain how Reed could just be up to something that they both don't fully understand, but Sue is over making any more excuses for him, implying that she never wanted to marry him to begin with. In fact, Sue and Ben actually end up together, with Reed becoming a villain. For some reason, I actually find this to be just a better fit for these two characters, just in terms of their overall paths. As much as they've had some pretty sweet moments together on Earth 616, the couple has also had major problems over the years that sometimes seem just to get swept under the rug so that we can, try to keep them together without any resolution of those problems. This, however, provides us with some resolution and consequence for those moments. And it kind of addresses some of them, which I like. Just feels a little more realistic.
Number 6, joining the X-Men. So while he was in deep cover, Wolverine sparked up a romance with Jean Grey. Now he wanted to seal the deal, really make it look believable, so he went on with this fake romance. Thing is, Wolverine actually fell in love with her. Oops. Now Scott, aka Cyclops, was a little upset during this, and Magneto actually wanted Scott to be with Wanda. But Scott had other ideas. But Scott was actually undercover as well, so he was on the bad team and then Wolverine was on the good team. It was basically The Departed, but you know, superheroes instead. The Jean and Wolverine affair gave Scott a reason to go and talk shop with Magneto. So he went in and then found out this plan, which was to wipe out Washington with Sentinels, and then the X-Men intervened and saved the president, who was naked at this time, you know, because sure. And this is when Wolverine fully becomes an X-Men. He attacks Magneto, with Quicksilver even removing Magneto's helmet to make it easier for him. So everybody came around and joined the good team, which is great. And then a page later, Wolverine is now in his new, much cozier home. And their first mission as the new X-Men team with Wolverine was to head back to Weapon X as a team to get some answers. Number 5, jealousy. Now this Wolverine gets pretty jealous as well. He takes things to a new height when he discovers that Jean Grey truly loves Cyclops. So Logan now wasn't a fan of Cyclops. There was this deep rift growing between them. So Charles was like, hey guys, why don't you both go to Savage Land together and work it out? You know, as dudes, couple dudes working it out. You can talk, throw rocks, whatever. They did not work it out. They got into a huge fight, and what happened really was Wolverine let Cyclops fall to his death in order to get Jean back. Cyclops survived because, you know, of course he did, and he exposed Wolverine to the crew, but Cyclops didn't blast him with his visions. No, he just blasted him with words. So he let Wolverine stay on the team, and this whole time Wolverine just sat and felt guilt. He was like, damn, maybe I am not a good friend after all. Interesting. He started to become a leader and he let his past self die. He became a role model for the younger X-Men like Rogue, and then he ended up becoming pretty good friends with Cyclops, even though, you know, he threw him off a cliff and all. Number 4, Sabretooth. So yeah, maybe you're wondering what ended up happening with that other insane guy, Victor. Well, when the team first went back to Weapon X, they came across Wraith and Sabretooth. Now, Sabretooth did one of the worst things ever at this point. He burned the files on Wolverine, literally just destroying his past right in front of him. And this leads them to their first violent conflict. They go back and forth, throwing each other into trees, and Sabretooth thinks that he's got him at one point. He's got him underwater, so he's holding Wolverine's head underwater, and he's questioning how exactly a healing factor will fix a suffocated brain, which is a great question. He's like, oh yeah, you hear that popping in your nose? That's your brain cells exploding. Now, it's cool, except Wolverine's underwater this whole time. He probably didn't hear any of this monologue, but it's still cool. But Wolverine's got that healing factor, which is probably stronger than we think. Number 3, healing factor. Ultimate Wolverine has been known to have a weaker healing factor than our 616 Wolverine, but it's kind of his main thing. I mean, Ultimate Wolverine can regenerate his body tissue so well that at one point, believe it or not, Wolverine was stuck under an iceberg, and the only way he survived was to bank on that healing factor, and he ate himself. The dude ate his arms, like he ate his body. It's like 127 hours, only, you know, he's fine. He just has to eat good. He ate strips of his own arm because he had to. I mean, he can grow it back, so it's not too horrible. No, that's still pretty horrible, actually, now that I think of it. Superheroes are wild because this opens up the meat dimension theory, which is just a blast. If you haven't heard of it, I strongly recommend you Google it after this. All this regeneration, where does the meat come from? Where does it go? Can he eat forever? What's going on? Question for you guys, if you could regenerate your cells and you were stuck, would you do it? Would you eat yourself? Let us know in the comments. That's a weird thing. Let us know in the comments though. I'm still curious. Number 2, adaptable. In Ultimate Wolverine vs. Hulk, it was said that Wolverine's power might be the survival ability. It's like his main thing. Because at one point his head gets clean off his body. It's just taken off, but he's still alive. And Nick Fury makes a good point here. He's like, well, if it was a healing factor, he would still be dead right about now because it's just his head. It still doesn't make any sense. But Ultimate Wolverine's head was alive and well. Now, without his lungs, he should not be able to breathe, but he adapted and started breathing through his skin. So he's adaptable in the most ultimate way. Number 1, combat. So the way he's able to fight off Sabretooth after being held underwater is just by going right in between the legs. He fights dirty, claws are out, he's doing what he has to be done. Wolverine says, hey, at least I have enough brain cells left to cover my family jewels in a fight. And I gotta tell you, that's a great call. Also, that's a great sentence to say right before you toss somebody off a cliff. This guy loves tossing people off cliffs, eh? Wow. So the ultimate combat is a bit more dirty, a little more rough than his 616 counterpart, I'd say. But that's because he kind of has to be, because his healing factor isn't as strong as a 616, and even his adamantium skeleton is not that helpful. Adamantium is weaker in the Ultimate Universe, fun fact. But even so, one time Magneto ripped his skeleton out of his skin and Wolverine had to regrow his entire body back. That's the most painful thing I can imagine. I still don't want that to happen, healing or not. I would fight dirty even if my bones were made of adamantium and even if my skin still came back out of nowhere. Because pain is still pain, and I don't want any of that pain. No, no sir.
Coming in at number 10 today is Kraven the Hunter. Kraven the Hunter's comic book tale seemingly came to an end in one of the most shocking Spider-Man stories ever. Kraven's last hunt finally sees the Hunter get the drop on Spider-Man. Sticking Spidey in the neck with a dart and then burying Spider-Man 6 feet under, Kraven actually beat his adversary, which only a handful of villains can actually claim to have accomplished. Thinking Peter Parker is down and out, Kraven weirdly then takes on Spider-Man's costume, or a copy of the black Spider-Man costume, and he hunts down criminals. In an attempt to prove himself that he's better than Spider-Man, he defeated Vermin, a villain that Spider-Man couldn't defeat without help from Captain America. Unfortunately, the whole thing still ends in tragedy for Kraven. Spider-Man digs himself out of the grave and renders Kraven's victory kind of moot, but Kraven also had accomplished his main goal by besting Spider-Man, something that not a lot of people can confidently say, like I said. Convincing himself that he has no reason to live anymore, Kraven chooses to defeat himself permanently. Number 9, Morlun. Coming Home was a Spider-Man story written by J. Michael Straczynski that introduced readers to a fresh new mystical adversary named Morlun. Now, Morlun was an energy vampire who thrived on the life forces of individuals who were powered up by animal totems, and the spider totems, like Spider-Man, were his favorite. In every aspect, Morlun surpassed Spider-Man. He possessed superior strength, speed, and thousands of years of experience. Although Spider-Man managed to emerge victorious in their initial encounter, he couldn't deny the intensity of the battle. So, of course, in their second confrontation, Morlun proved to be absolutely devastating. Morlun dominated Spider-Man, leaving him battered and broken like never before. Morlun even managed to send Spider-Man off with a round-trip ticket to the pits of Tartarus. Now, while Spider-Man's demise was only temporary, his return marked a transformation, turning Spider-Man into basically a monster with newfound abilities that actually allowed him to take the victory. This battle stands out as one of the most crushing defeats Spider-Man has ever endured. Number 8, Juggernaut. Juggernaut is one of the few Marvel heavyweights you just shouldn't cross paths with. Even the heroic heavy hitters know this, but when he rampaged through New York City like an unstoppable force in the Amazing Spider-Man number 229 to 230, Spider-Man had no choice but to intervene. Now, it turns out, getting involved was far more than Spider-Man could really handle. Once Juggernaut set himself in motion, nothing could halt him, and Peter learned this the extremely hard way. Over 2 whole comic book issues, Spider-Man exerted all his might against Juggernaut, and it was all futile, as a regular spider trying to stop a train. Spider-Man could do absolutely nothing, and he got completely pummeled. Now, of course, Spider-Man did eventually take the win, but it wasn't anything he physically did that got him the victory. It was actually his brain that stepped in. Juggernaut actually ended up being caught in wet cement, and I gotta be honest, I really don't think that wet cement would actually stop this guy, but they had to get Spider-Man out alive somehow. Number 7, Doc Ock. Dr. Octopus is one of the Spider-Man villains that has a very serious claim at being the primary adversary to Peter Parker. He has consistently given Spider-Man enough grief to cause wrinkles, but then Otto is also one of the few villains to absolutely defeat his hero. When Otto was beginning to lose his life, he managed to find a way to transfer his consciousness into the body of Peter Parker, while transferring Peter's consciousness into his failing body. Peter ended up completely passing away, at least temporarily, inside the body of his adversary, while Otto gained an incredibly powerful body and a new, slightly heroic personality, becoming the superior Spider-Man. But Spider-Ock, or Spock as the fans call him, changes things. He took his genius and experience and applied it, making an awesome new suit, spider bots, and mechanical arms. He also straight up took villains to their graves and even single-handedly defeated the Sinister Six, taking the living brain as a trophy. He completely dumps MJ, but starts a relationship with Anna Maria Marconi, who became a popular addition to the Spider-Man canon. He purged Carly Cooper of the Goblin Serum, helped Aunt May walk again, got Peter his PhD, mainly for clout, and built a scientific empire that would make him a multi-billionaire. He made himself a much more efficient hero than Spider-Man ever could be. Or was.
Number 6, Spider-Man. Not only has Moon Knight very physically humbled Spider-Man from the Ultimate Universe, or rather I guess I should say the old Ultimate Universe anyway, but he's also humbled the Spider-Man of Earth 616 in a very personal way. At one point, Mark Spector adopted certain personas which acted as additional split personalities as part of his dissociative identity disorder. You might be familiar with Stephen Grant, Jake Lockley, and Mr. Knight, but these personas were unlike any of those that Moon Knight sometimes adopts and uses. But these personas that I'm talking about here were unlike any of those others that Moon Knight sometimes adopts and uses that you probably are familiar with. These were people that existed separate from Mark, who he was basically impersonating, other heroes, one of them being Spider-Man. He donned Spider-Man's costume, literally impersonating him as he fought against the criminal underground of LA. At one point, this prompts Spider-Man, who was wrongfully, of course, getting critiqued for some of what Mark was up to ask Mark if he indeed dressed up as him and attacked an adult nightclub, to which Mark confirms, yes, he did. A little. Number 5, Captain Marvel. This one was particularly brutal, especially for me as a Carol fan. Another hero who was targeted during the Age of Khonshu story in the 2018 run of the Avengers was none other than Captain Marvel herself, Carol Danvers. Carol and Tony, aka Iron Man, were the last line of defense when it came to protecting the power of the Star Brand, which Khonshu wanted most of all. And when Moon Knight came to collect, he made a surprisingly easy work of Carol here. He used the powers of Ghost Rider to basically incapacitate her, seemingly trapping her in the trunk of Robbie Reyes' Ghost Rider car. But as embarrassing as that predicament was for Captain Marvel, at least it was only very temporary. She quickly recovered, escaping from the trunk and flying in to save Starbrand and Iron Man, who according to Moon Knight looked like he was ready to consider handing over the young Starbrand host to Moon Knight and Khonshu due to the threat of Mephisto. In fact, even later, Iron Man's like, whatever you do, like, just you keep Starbrand. I probably shouldn't hold on to her. Number 4, Khonshu. I don't know if we exactly consider Khonshu to be a hero per se. He's kind of more neutral. He's done some good and often acts from a place of, believing, I would say, he's doing what is right, but he's not always correct about that. And sometimes even his best of intentions lead him to doing morally questionable things, let's say. Like in Age of Khonshu, when he struck out against the Avengers. He did this because he believed it needed to be done to defeat Mephisto, believing he needed to conquer Earth to, in essence, protect it from the Mephisto army that threatened to take control. So he was doing all this to, protect Earth. However, he was kind of wrong in that, because also conquering people, is that protecting them? Not really. And in the end, this prompted even his own avatar, Mark Spector, Moon Knight, to turn on him, with Moon Knight winning over the power of the Phoenix Force and using his own 2 fists of Khonshu to help defeat the Moon God. Or rather, his fists of Phoenix, really, at that time, I should say. Number 3, Daredevil. These two have a brief fight in the 1980 series of Moon Knight in issue number 13. Here, Daredevil is hot on the trail of a villain known as the Jester. Unfortunately, Moon Knight decides to interfere as he cannot allow DD to apprehend this criminal yet. He cuts the zip line that Daredevil is using to cut across part of the city, and Daredevil stumbles, or rather falls, sort of tumbles into an arcade, which discombobulates his radar sense, because as we know with Daredevil, he really needs his hearing to actually be able to see, making it pretty much impossible for him to see, or it's pretty wonky in that arcade due to all the arcade noise. The two get in a scuffle, and while DD doesn't do a terrible job, I would say, of fighting against Moon Knight, considering at this moment he truly is really blind as a bat since his radar sense is affected, in the end he's defeated by Moon Knight, who throws his own billy club back at DD. Fortunately, right afterwards, the two heroes talk and end up deciding to team up, as is usually the way of these things. But still, I mean, it's a Moon Knight comic, so what do we expect when Moon Knight and Daredevil fight? In a Moon Knight comic, I'm gonna expect Moon Knight to win, and he does. Number 2, Thor. Thor and Moon Knight had a very brief fight at the beginning of the Age of Khonshu event, where Thor was quickly put in his place. He does get revenge later on though, but that's a point for another list. The fight didn't last long, mainly because Moon Knight was actually able to wield Mjolnir. But not only that, not really so much wield, he was able to control the hammer. He was able to easily take it for himself. Thor, in fact, is one of the first heroes Moon Knight faces off with during this story, which is made all the more impressive when you consider that perhaps, apart from Hulk, Thor is often considered to be one of, if not the strongest Avenger that we have. Moon Knight simply lets Thor know that the metal his hammer is made of, Uru, believed to be one of the oldest metals in the universe, actually comes from an orb of night. That is, a moon. It's moon metal, guys. It's moon rock. And because it is in essence made of that powerful moon rock, it's within Moon Knight's control to manipulate said weapon, since he's an avatar of the god of the moon. Number 1. Moon Knight. Yep. At one point, Moon Knight defeated himself. He actually also faced himself in the very important Moon Knight story told throughout the Avengers, Age of Khonshu. Here, Moon Knight in the end realizes that he kind of might be the problem here and decides that, you know, he's done working for Khonshu. He's kind of done with gods, preferring to pray only to himself. In his final fight in the story against Black Panther, he ends up on the losing side of this fight and begs for Black Panther to finish it. To be clear, this is another fight that happens with Black Panther later on, not the first one that I talked about earlier on. However, Black Panther refuses to take Mark's life, permanently defeating Mark here. Instead, Mark decides to just finish it himself because he has to finish that prayer. So he punches himself so hard that he's basically reborn as the Phoenix. Number 10. Bishop. When Bishop shows up on the scene, he is quick to single out Gambit, who he believes to be the man he knows as the Witness in his future. He believes this is why the Witness will not speak or show anything regarding the mutant Gambit, because he is the mutant Gambit, and Bishop thinks he is the one who betrays the X-Men in the future. However, everyone else in the X-Men is very offended by this implication, and Jean wonders if, despite all the drama, they can just still go on their planned picnic. In gloriously 90s fashion, despite Bishop's appearance, they actually do go on a picnic. It is here that Bishop confronts Gambit while he is on a picnic with Rogue specifically. Although Gambit is not down for the count, Bishop does slug him so hard that he goes flying into Rogue. The whole interaction is honestly like comedy gold. It is peak 90s, but one does feel pretty bad for Gambit in all of this. I mean, I always feel bad for Gambit. People always coming in being like, Gambit, you're trash, you're terrible. And I'm like, you don't even know. Like, just give him a second, let him breathe. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love it when we talk mutants, I know I love it, be sure to check out our X-Men playlist for even more mutant content. Number 9. Himself. Gambit actually humbled himself intentionally in the comics. If you've ever seen Gambit doing his thing and thought he has the potential to be even more powerful, you would actually be right. Gambit in fact has the potential to be a dangerous level of powerful with his abilities, which is why he actually asked Mr. Sinister to literally nerf him by messing with his brain. Gambit had Mr. Sinister intentionally dampen his powers so that he wouldn't hurt anyone, and in return, for a while, Gambit was indebted to Mr. Sinister and therefore forced to do his dirty work. Number 8. Iceman. It's blue versus gold in this issue, and as a result, Gambit ends up face to face with Bobby Drake's Iceman. While he may have been able to dodge every shot Forge could target him with, and even parry some of those shots back at Forge, when it comes to Iceman, Gambit is quickly and handily defeated as he is knocked out with a solid block of ice. He did not see that one coming, which hits him square on the jaw. Number 7. Black Panther. What a terrible time for Gambit's powers to go on the fritz, oh boy. Right when he's in the middle of a fight with Black Panther. Yet, that's just what happened in Gambit and Rogue's most recent team-up series, Rogue and Gambit Volume 2 from 2023. Here, Gambit and Rogue are accused of kidnapping fellow mutant and friend to T'Challa, Manifold, at the behest of Destiny, who had a vision about how Manifold could basically be the key to saving all of mutant kind. Black Panther doesn't really blame Rogue though here, he actually blames Gambit for corrupting his wife, seeing him as no more than a common low-level thief. See what I'm saying? Gambit just can't catch a break, man. Black Panther pounces at Gambit, and while Gambit manages to get in at least a single hit, his powers then decide to just stop working, which is something Rogue and Gambit have both been dealing with in the desert, power loss in that series. And so Rogue steps in to save the day while Gambit creates a distraction so they can just simply escape T'Challa instead of fight him, because they know if they fought him, probably not gonna win, especially if they don't have powers. Number 6. Squirrel Girl. I mean, it was only a matter of time, right? They don't call Doreen Green unbeatable for nothing. This fight went down mainly as the result of a miscommunication between the two. Deadpool thought that Squirrel Girl wasn't registered under the Superhuman Registration Act. However, before they could have a discussion and clear things up between them, first, they, of course, had to fight. Normally, Deadpool is a lot better at fighting than he was here, but as he sometimes does, and as many of us do, he got
distracted. He became obsessed with Squirrel Girl's appearance and became fixated on guessing her superhero name and the reason why she appeared to be a woman-squirrel hybrid. His distracted state gave Doreen the advantage she needed to beat him. And then afterwards, they of course were able to talk it out and resolve the miscommunication. Sometimes you gotta swing a few punches first and then sit down and have a little chat. Number 5. Daredevil. Daredevil is not a hero I personally would want to go up against, especially if I was Wade at this time and I was like basically a shapeshifter who looks super questionable. Deadpool underestimated Daredevil and was quickly put in his place. Despite attempting to explain himself, Daredevil still decided to restrain Deadpool, leaving him defeated and bound in the middle of the street at the end of their fight. Number 4. Thor. Deadpool used to love dressing up as Thor, but while people say imitation is the best form of flattery, let's keep in mind that this is a Midgardian saying and not an Asgardian one. I don't even know what the sayings or idioms of Asgard are. Eternal life is like an apple? Is that one of them? It would make sense. So of course when Thor came across Deadpool impersonating him, he was not too pleased. And look, Deadpool is a pretty gifted fighter and also has that healing factor on lock, but he's not nearly, not even close to as powerful as Thor is. Not by a long shot. So of course no one was surprised when Thor made pretty quick work of Deadpool with his hammer Mjolnir. Number 3. Spider-Man. Spider-Man even beat Deadpool at his own games. Deadpool sometimes operates on a different level than most other superheroes, or rather anti-heroes in the Marvel Universe. There have been times when he fights simply with the power of his mind. And I don't mean that he's telekinetic or is a psionic powerhouse or anything like that. I mean with his ability to break the fourth wall and escape into a fantasy land, which often manifests somehow in reality. I don't know how that works, but it's a thing. This is what happened when Deadpool fought Spider-Man in the Ultimate Spider-Man animated series. Here, Deadpool was attempting to get a list from Spider-Man that would be extremely valuable if put in the wrong hands, making Deadpool a bunch of money. And as a mercenary, we all know Deadpool does love his money. The two fought and Deadpool ended up using the power of his imagination to try and defeat Spider-Man. But fortunately, Spider-Man, master of quips and puns that he is, was able to turn the tables on Deadpool, hitting him with a book of morals, literally, that made Deadpool reflect on his origins and feel real feelings, which ultimately cost him the fight. Although he refused to be taken into fury by Spider-Man, Deadpool did admit that their fight was going to make him go home and cry himself to sleep. So there is that. Number 2. Wolverine and Sabretooth. Okay, so Sabretooth isn't really a superhero, but sometimes in the comics he has actually been good. Did you know that? Like during Axis, when many heroes and villains had their alignments reversed. Sabretooth was one of the characters whose alignment stayed permanently reversed after the events of Axis. It wouldn't be till later, after he had sacrificed himself in order to save his son, that he would get turned back to his original alignment and become evil again. In the version of the story I'm talking about though, Sabretooth was not really a good guy. Because yeah, we're talking about X-Men Origins Wolverine, the film. Yeah, that film. But I still wanted to include Sabretooth in this point because as I said, he isn't always so bad, and in this fight, he and Wolverine are actually forced to team up to take down Wade Wilson, who becomes the strangest version of Deadpool we've ever seen on screen as Weapon 11. As Weapon 11, Wade had no mouth to make quips with, and instead of having his 2 katanas, he had 2 swords just in his arms. He made for a very weird opponent who also was super hard to defeat, surprisingly, but with Wolverine and Sabretooth both coming out against him, Logan was able to find a window to take him down. Number 1. Cable. Well, these two have had a ton of goofy fights too, and also have had a ton of honestly sweet moments in the comics. This was actually a pretty serious fight that happened between them. It went down during Civil War I. This all happened as a result of Deadpool and Cable being on different sides of this first Civil War. Deadpool ended up on the side of pro-registration and went around trying to round up heroes who refused to register. However, then he came across Cable, who attempted to try and talk Wade out of making this mistake. Deadpool, however, of course, would not listen to reason, and the two were forced to fight one another. Deadpool fired darts at Cable, but Cable's shield caused them to rebound back, making them hit Deadpool, so yeah, Deadpool ended up losing this one. And also, he was kinda on the losing side of that civil war, to be honest with you. Deadpool is bad luck when it comes to like, which side are you gonna choose? Number 10, Moon Knight. This one was insane when it happened during the Age of Khonshu's story. My mind was blown. Your mind was likely blown, and probably everyone's minds were blown. Everyone who read this, that is. And if you didn't, well, prepare to have your mind blown as I get you up to speed. During Age of Khonshu, Moon Knight turned on pretty much all of the Avengers. Did this make him a villain? Not really. He actually thought he was doing the right thing as he tried to help Khonshu prepare to take down Mephisto, who is, you know, a pretty big bad. However, he was later made aware of the fact that Khonshu wanted to defeat Mephisto so that he, instead, could kinda rule the world and shape it in his own image, turning it into a sort of Egyptian afterlife. So in the end, Khonshu had to be defeated and imprisoned, and Moon Knight instead turned on his own god, working to help the Avengers fight back against him. But before that, Moon Knight was on a mission to collect powerful, heroic artifacts and powers to help him in his quest to aid Khonshu. One such magical and heroic artifact that he needed was Thor's hammer, and he was able to get it as it was revealed that Moon Knight could actually control the hammer. Not necessarily because he was worthy, but because of its metallic makeup, being made of Uru, which means it's essentially made of moon rock. Yeah, that's what Uru is. Really old moon rock from the first moon. And the moon is kind of Moon Knight's thing, which meant he didn't need to be worthy to wield Mjolnir. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd and you love it when we talk about heroes that are getting humbled by other heroes, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. It does feed the algorithm gods. Number 9, Zeus. Love and Thunder might not have been the movie we were all hoping for, but it did have some pretty hilarious moments, and some tragically embarrassing ones for Thor as well. One such moment, which was both, happened when Thor finally met his hero, the god Zeus. However, as the saying goes, never meet your heroes. Zeus decided to remove Thor's disguise and ends up completely removing Thor's clothes as a result. Pretty embarrassing. This leaves Thor completely uncovered in front of Zeus, while everyone around Thor laughs, cause he's not just in front of Zeus, he's in front of a whole bunch of other gods. Oh boy. And Valkyrie. And Jane. Zeus isn't exactly a hero in this story, but he also isn't exactly a villain, I would say, either. He's more just like kind of a self-absorbed and stubborn god, which is what ultimately leads him into a conflict with our heroes in the story when he refuses to listen to them. And I'm sure if, you know, we do actually get more Hercules stuff, we're gonna see that it's complicated. The Greek pantheon is just a different pantheon, so. Number 8, Black Bolt. Black Bolt ends up facing off against a venom-possessed Thor in the What If comic, What If the Alien Costume Had Possessed Spider-Man? In this story, the Fantastic Four failed to remove the suit from Peter as it's too late for them to do so, with the symbiote and Spider-Man being fully bonded. This leads to Peter being drained of all life energy and rapidly aging before the suit jumps to a new host. It possesses Hulk, and when Thor arrives on the scene, decides to instead attempt to bond with Thor. While Thor fights against the alien costume, Black Bolt appears and uses his powerful voice to blast away the Venom symbiote, defeating it and saving Thor from its influence. Through, of course, well, defeating him. Number 7, Hercules. As was implied at the end of Love and Thunder, Zeus is not the only god that Thor faces off against. It seems that the after credits were actually setting up a future fight between the Norse hero god and the Greek one, Hercules, son of Zeus. And in the comics, this has actually happened before. Hercules has indeed beaten Thor in the past. While Thor would typically be more powerful than Hercules, I'd surmise just based on what I've read of both of these characters, there was a time when Thor's power levels had been somewhat reduced by Odin, and he challenged Hercules to a fight. And it was during this fight that Hercules actually managed to come out on top instead, so Hercules won that one. Number 6, Joelle. Is Joelle really a superhero? Well, she's a superpowered person, and while she is also a thief, I don't think her motives are necessarily bad here at all, so I'm gonna count her, okay? I just like Joelle. She's fun, she's quippy, she's sassy. I like her. And she isn't focused on hurting anyone, really. Actually, Joelle actively shows that she wants to make sure that no one else gets hurt because of her, which seems pretty heroic. Joelle was the woman that Remy met up with in his own series, Gambit, volume number 5, out of 2012. Throughout the series, Joelle is constantly putting him in his place. While she claims she needs his help to get a cure for her daughter, what she really wants is something that will end her life. Her power is eternal, and she no longer wants to continue on after suffering too much loss. Personally, I love how much she schools and teases Gambit throughout the series, and I am really sad that she was such a short-lived character, because she was pretty cool. Number 5. Wolverine. We're talking about The Lost Trail, and at least there is cover art for this podcast though, so we can show that. That's one image we have. The Lost Trail is a follow-up story to the previous Wolverine podcast, The Long Night. While in Long Night, Wolverine is mainly a mysterious figure for much of the story, who was a suspect in some trouble that happened up in Alaska. In Lost Trail, he is very much one of the main characters as he ventures down to Louisiana and the Bayou to find his missing past love, Maureen, while also helping a teenage kid, Marcus Baptiste, look for his ma, who, along with their mutant-based community, also went mysteriously missing. During his time in Louisiana, he runs into his former colleague Gambit, and also at one point is forced to fight Gambit. Gambit at the time was being brainwashed by Mastermind, FYI. Wolverine successfully schools him, breaking his bow staff and knocking him out with, well, a single punch. Poor Gambit, everyone is always breaking his bow staff. That just happens a lot. He must have an endless supply of bow staffs. Number 4. Rogue. During the Rogue and Gambit miniseries, Rogue humbles Gambit in a different sort of way. In regards to his smooching abilities, Rogue, hitting him where it hurts. Rogue really knows how to take Gambit down a notch. I think this went down in their team up miniseries, Rogue and Gambit, not the most recent one, the one that happened before that, because there's been a couple of those. Gambit confronts Rogue about hearing that she had kissed Deadpool, sharing that news spreads fast among the X-Men gossip grapevine. Rogue attests that she personally knows that, as she has received many concerning calls regarding Remy's behavior over the years. She then goes on to suggest that Deadpool, due to his lack of face, may actually even be a better kisser, because he tries harder than Remy does, implying that Remy skates by on good looks as opposed to skill in the romance department. Boom. Mic drop. Number 3. Emma Frost. Emma Frost definitely put Gambit in his place when he and Rogue were having some romance issues. Gambit and Rogue had been depowered together, but when their powers returned, they kinda struggled to return to a life of, well, pure celibacy. They reached out to Emma Frost for help, who consulted with them and attempted to find a safe space where they could come together telepathically, so not physically in the real world, but kind of physically in their minds. Through her therapy, they were able to be in the same space and touch without danger, except for the fact that their own fears around intimacy and the status of their relationship actually did keep them apart, acting like blocks in their mind. Initially, Rogue almost killed Gambit in the telepathic state, and another time he imagined Rogue as one of his students, who was actively attempting to pursue him. This prompted Remy to freak out, and Emma slapped him back to reality. When Rogue picked up on Gambit's feelings, she called him out on his baggage, with him retorting that if he was with his student Fox, who was really Mystique in disguise, unbeknownst to them both, to make it a little less creepy, but still it's pretty creepy, he wouldn't have to deal with telepathic therapy. So there, Rogue, putting the blame back on her. And after Rogue, of course, stormed off, Emma was there to call out Gambit for making this way worse with his response to Rogue's comment. Emma truly seemed frustrated with both of them, to be honest, although perhaps more so with Gambit. And I mean, Gambit was the one that she slapped in that issue, so. Number 2. Captain America. To be honest, Gambit actually gave Cap a pretty good run for his money here, but it sadly was not good enough. In Avengers vs. X-Men issue number 2, we're starting off with a fight between the X-Men's Gambit and the Avengers' Captain America, Steve Rogers. Why are these two fighting? Well, because of a larger issue at hand. Avengers vs. X-Men was really all about a conflict surrounding the Phoenix Force. Basically, the Avengers felt like the Phoenix Force was unsafe and should be fought and like destroyed, whereas the X-Men were more open to the idea of using the Force, as they thought it would actually help in bringing back the mutant species that had been drastically reduced in number following the events of M-Day. First, it seems as though Gambit has the upper hand in this fight, with him even going so far as to charge Cap's armor and blow it up, thinking that'll end the fight. But Captain America is apparently tougher than Gambit estimated. He not only survives the explosion, but manages to then knock Gambit out with one punch. Another fight where Gambit's bow staff is tragically destroyed. Rest in peace, Gambit's bow staff. Always destroyed. Number 1. Gambit. I know what you're thinking. Am I putting Gambit on this list twice? Well, sort of. Gambit literally humbled himself in the one case, but in this case, Gambit humbled not necessarily himself as Gambit, but
New Sun, who is an alternate version of Gambit entirely. This version of Gambit never had the inhibiting surgery performed on him, and so he was powerful enough to essentially destroy worlds. His powers had grown to the point that he didn't even need to see an object to charge it with energy. New Sun was powerful enough to take on other superpowered beings like the Phoenix and beat them. In fact, New Sun had not only destroyed the Phoenix, but as I said, destroyed his own entire world that he came from. Gambit, because of this, was forced to unlock the full potential of his power once more to take on New Sun. And guess what? It worked! His sense of creativity was actually more attuned and heightened than New Sun's was, and he was able as such to defeat his alternate self. However, in the process, he essentially burned out his powers, overcharging himself. So that's why instead of being Omega level today, he's still considered to be, well, just Alpha, once more nerfing himself. Although this time, not necessarily intentionally, but just doing so in order to save the day. And also, who knows, he might become Omega again one day.
Number 10. Dr. Doom. Dr. Doom and Spider-Man do not fight in the same weight class at all. However, in their first ever encounter, Spider-Man did manage to get the better of Doom, and that may have stung. So, in Amazing Spider-Man Volume 1, number 349 and 350, it did not go well for the wall crawler at all. This time, Spidey was tracking an elderly jewel thief named the Black Fox, who had stolen the priceless Trask Diamond. Black Fox had also happened to barter one of Victor Von Doom's family heirlooms, an emerald passed down to him by his late mother. Once Doom became aware of this transgression, he flew to New York and caught up with the Black Fox at the same time Spider-Man did. When Spidey intervened on the Black Fox's behalf, Dr. Doom did not hold back. Doom nonchalantly thrashed the hell out of the web-slinger, leaving him with his costume in tatters and desperately scrambling away for his life. While he convinced Doom to allow him time to retrieve his old family heirloom, Peter's severe beating had left him concussed, so much so that he even hallucinated Uncle Ben. The beating he took taught Spidey an important lesson about recognizing his own limits. Number 9. Kingpin. Now, I'll admit, we at Top 10 Nerd, like a lot of comic book nerds, love to talk about the time that Peter Parker nearly ended Wilson Fisk's life, beating the heck out of him in prison in front of all of his goons. He embarrassed the heck out of Fisk that day, but that was all to prove that he can, because there have been numerous times where the Kingpin has shown Spider-Man the error of his ways. Take the very first meeting, for example. In The Amazing Spider-Man number 50 and 52, this is the famous arc where Spider-Man gives up being a superhero, and in his absence, the Kingpin jumps at the opportunity. The comic makes it pretty clear that Spider-Man assumes that Kingpin is just some big squishy overweight man. This proves to be a pretty rough mistake. Kingpin is much faster and much stronger than Spider-Man initially realizes, being actually composed of almost entirely muscle. He gets Peter with a good grab and slam, and then out of left field, he uses a gas to knock out the Spider by the end of issue number 51. Now, issue number 52 sees Kingpin's goons putting Spider-Man and J. Jonah Jameson in an extremely supervillainy chamber, locking them up and slowly filling it with water. Sure, Spider-Man does escape, but even the final fight against Kingpin sees the villain get a bunch of good hits and even escape. Number 8. Mephisto. One More Day is infamous among Spider-Man fans, and understandably so. The story completely retconned Spider-Man's marriage to Mary Jane Watson out of continuity, and it was all thanks to Mephisto. And poor choices by Marvel, but whatever. This was a relationship that had been built up over literal decades, that had been carried over into the movies, the newspaper strip, every other version of Spider-Man. It was arguably Marvel's best romance, and Mephisto took it all away in exchange for saving Aunt May's life. The storyline takes place after Marvel's Civil War crossover, where Spider-Man revealed his secret identity to the world. In the fallout after Civil War, dozens of villains targeted Peter Parker and his loved ones, including Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, and Peter's Aunt May was caught in the crossfire. Desperate to save May Parker's life, Spider-Man went to anyone and everyone to find some way to avert disaster. When no one else came through though, the devil himself, Mephisto, offered Peter a treacherous trade. May's life in exchange for Peter and MJ's marriage. Now, love it or hate it, it happened, and it made Spider-Man give up his greatest love ever. Number 7. Black Tarantula. I'm not gonna lie, I didn't know much about Black Tarantula before this day, but now that I do, I actually really like him. He's super cool. So, showing up in The Amazing Spider-Man 432, Black Tarantula seemingly attacks our spider hero out of nowhere, chucking half a chimney at him as his first move. Now, while Spider-Man tries to figure out who the heck this guy is and why he is after Spider-Man in the first place, he is dodging out of the way of optic blasts, massive punches, and even his webs do nothing as Tarantula just rips through them like tissue paper. Spider-Man even has a whole flashback about how Mary Jane wanted him to quit being Spider-Man during this fight, which was interrupted as Black Tarantula smashes through the wall that Spider-Man was standing on. Spider-Man ends up floating down to an alleyway, and while he gets maybe 2 or 3 punches on Tarantula, when the villain gets his hand on Spider-Man's ankle, it's all over. He slams Peter between the alleyway walls and down onto the pavement. He then literally rips off Peter's mask, revealing his bruised face before telling him that he is sparing him so he can find Norman Osborn's missing child, but when he's done that, Spider-Man needs to leave New York. He then walks off, leaving Peter in the fetal position, counting his injuries and thanking his stars that he's still alive.
Number 6. She-Hulk. She-Hulk doesn't need to fight Thor to humble him. She just has to look at him the right way and call him out on his feelings. These two were an item for a while in the previous Avengers run in the comics. Their relationship came about from their bonding on the Avengers team together, and likely due to them both being super fun-loving characters who also honestly both love a good fist fight. They are both powerful characters who aren't afraid of having fun, and Thor of course was not intimidated by Jen's strength as She-Hulk, but instead admired her for it. Of course, that isn't to say the couple didn't have their challenges. At one point they almost broke up because Jen wasn't sure if Thor loved her solely for her She-Hulk persona and appearance. Thor was actually humbled by Jen, who actually called him out on this, but she was then reassured that he loved her for who she was entirely, both as Jennifer Walters and as She-Hulk, which he admitted he saw as basically one and the same. Super cute. While I was never a big fan of this relationship when it was happening, I have to admit that every time I return to it in the comics when I'm talking about it here on Top 10 Nerd, I gotta say, it makes me more and more a fan of it, and I get it more and more every time I return to it. I just think maybe these two could be shipped together, maybe it would really work. And now I'm like, man, now that relationship's gone. I love how when there's ships that I come around to after the ship has already happened. That ship has sailed. Number 5. Sentry. This one didn't happen in the main continuity, but as is implied in this what if the conditions were right in the main continuity, it could have very well gone down like this. Sentry is often thought of as the Superman of the Marvel Universe, or one of them anyways, so it would make sense that he'd stand a chance against Thor, as Superman in the comics is basically a godlike figure. However, when these two faced off during Dark Reign's Siege story, it was Thor who came out on top. Now in the What If comic centered around Siege, Sentry instead kills Ares earlier on, which means that when Thor comes to face him, he actually isn't as exhausted from that immediate fight, which is what happens in the main continuity. This means he has enough stamina to not only defeat Thor, but also to destroy, get this, all of the Avengers besides. Yeah, Sentry is super powerful, and I do believe he could take Thor in a fight. Number 4. Scarlet Witch. I'm not surprised that Wanda could take Thor myself. Scarlet Witch is one of the most powerful heroes in, I would say, the entire Marvel multiverse after all. However, some might be surprised by this, especially when you consider that Thor is also partly connected to the realm of magic, and especially if you consider that, you know, Wanda is a magic user, so she's kinda squishy. Of course, Thor doesn't typically tend to use magic to fight, and Wanda being squishy, I mean, you gotta get to her first. Now, Thor does have something magical that he could use here, and that would be his hammer Mjolnir, but that was not enough to save him from Wanda's spells when she was forced to turn on her friend and fellow Avenger after he'd been mind controlled by Red Skull, who was using Professor X's brain at the time. Yep, that's what happened, that was the whole thing. Scarlet Witch managed to use her powers to hold Thor back, preventing him from hurting her or any other heroes or villains. And I would say she did so pretty successfully. Personally, I would say Wanda could beat Thor if she wanted to. Just normally they don't have to fight because they're friends. Number 3. Phoenix. The Phoenix is one of the few heroes who succeeded in destroying Thor. I mean, it's hard to compete with the sheer impossible force of the Phoenix. This time around, it wasn't just one person who took down Thor as the Phoenix instead. It was Thor against 5 individuals with the power of the Phoenix Force, which was split between them, who each honestly handily defeated him. The group of Phoenix-empowered heroes who he went up against included Cyclops, Emma Frost, Namor, Magik, and Colossus. In fact, fact, at one point Colossus was even seemingly able to separate Thor from Mjolnir. Not an easy feat. Also, if Thor faces off against the Phoenix, who's kind of like his mom as well, does that mean that he got schooled by his own mom? Is that what that means? Gotta ask. Number 2, Hulk. Hulk and Thor are two of the greatest rivals in the comics. Now sure, they're both heroes, and sure, they're both friends, but that doesn't mean that they have not gotten into a fight or two, or several, or well, a bunch. Sometimes these fights can even get pretty serious, sometimes they just are carried out to settle once and for all which one of them is the strongest Avenger. So, who really is the strongest Avenger? Well, while many of the fights that I've read show Thor coming out on top, there have been a few times when Hulk has proven that he really is the strongest there is, even against a cosmic god who wields a magic hammer. In fact, Mjolnir tends to be one of the greatest challenges that Hulk often faces in his fights against Thor. But in one fight featured in the Hulk Let the Battle Begin story, Hulk finds a way around this by simply not trying to move the hammer itself, but instead Thor's own arm that's holding the hammer. In this way, Hulk is able to basically make Thor hit himself with his own hammer, knocking himself out. Pretty good go around. Pretty smart, Hulk. Number 1, Beta Ray Bill. Beta Ray Bill humbled Thor in his very first fight against him. The two faced off when Beta Ray Bill mistook Thor for an enemy, threatening his people, survivors from his homeworld who were basically searching for a new home. The two fought and Bill won, initially even claiming Mjolnir for himself as spoils from their fight. Of course that would all be corrected, and then they'd become friends, but hey, Beta Ray, you got it. Number 10. Deadpool. If you thought Deadpool was a brutal vigilante and sometimes straight up anti-hero, wait till you see him go up against Moon Knight. In Vengeance of the Moon Knight issue number 8, these two face off. And while you might think Deadpool's healing factor would give him a leg up here, it is actually Moon Knight who comes out the victor in their fight. What's interesting is seeing the difference and similarities of these characters juxtaposed throughout their fight. Both are brutal in terms of their methods, both have their own voices in their head to deal with, and both of them are often heroes who are misunderstood. Sometimes they seem like the bad guys while trying to do the heroic thing. Their initial fight here doesn't last long though, as Moon Knight uses his sword to make Deadpool admit defeat, with him surrendering, croaking out, "Uncle." And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not consider subscribing? Click that subscribe button, it feeds the algorithm, it's good for your soul, you should do it. Number 9, Black Panther. During Age of Khonshu in the 2018 run of Avengers, in issue number 33, Moon Knight faced off against pretty much all of the Avengers. One that he faced directly was Black Panther. Now, when he confronted T'Challa in Wakanda with his army of basically Khonshu worshippers, his presence was so intimidating, in addition to his previous encounters with Iron Fist, and Doctor Strange, that the two didn't even have to fight. Instead, Black Panther simply chose to surrender. Of course, this was strategic, but the fact remains that Moon Knight got what he wanted, a willful surrender from Black Panther without even having to come to blows. Instead, he just intimidated T'Challa into surrendering to him, even if it was, like I said, also possibly a strategic play on Black Panther's side. T'Challa would still end up imprisoned, tormented, and bound, forced to bow down to the power of Khonshu in the next issue. Number 8, Ultimate Spider-Man. When it comes to the Ultimate Universe, Moon Knight is an even more terrifying vigilante. At one point, he faces off against the Ultimate Universe version of Peter Parker's Spider-Man, and manages to scare him off with how crazy and how powerful he is, and how scary he is, to be honest. Pretty impressive when you consider that normally Spider-Man would be considered more physically strong and overall more powerful than Mark and his Moon Knight persona. Why were these two even fighting? Well, Moon Knight has mistaken Spider-Man here for a criminal, but even Spider-Man was just intimidated by the hero, and instead of sticking around, opted to just escape the fight instead. It's not a straight-up defeat, but making Spider-Man retreat is not easy to do in most cases, and I personally would still consider if somebody retreats that they kind of lost that fight because they left. Number 7, Ghost Rider. How do you humble the Ghost Rider? How about stealing his wheels? For Robbie Reyes, that's one of the worst things you can do, steal his car, and that's exactly what Moon Knight set out to do and accomplished. While Robbie was asleep, Moon Knight basically managed to jack his car, which also drained Robbie of much of his power as Ghost Rider, as that power was actually tied to his car. Moon Knight simply took the car and drove off into the night with it in issue number 33, part 1 of the Age of Khonshu story from the 2018 run of Avengers. This was also the first part of that story, and to really
really humble Robbie Reyes, he was only one of a few heroes who had their source of power taken by Moon Knight, all in this one single issue.
Number 6. Cadaverous. Ivan Renz was an employee of Stark Industries alongside his mentor and Peter Parker's parents. They developed the Key, a tech that could potentially bring people back to life, but the experiments failed, sending his mentor to the afterlife. Now, Tony Stark dismantled the unit, and Ivan eventually became the supervillain known as Cadaverous, only ever appearing in the J.J. and Henry Abrams written Bloodline Spider-Man storyline from 2019. Mary Jane Watson loses her life to Cadaverous on the 5th page of the first issue after Spider-Man is swarmed and beaten pretty badly by him and his minions. Then Spider-Man just completely quits. 12 years later, the story has a one-armed version of Peter Parker, who is now the honestly pretty horrible single father of Ben Parker, Peter and Mary Jane's son. After Cadaverous returns out of hiding and kidnaps Peter to use his blood for his evil plans, it's up to the new Spider-Man, Ben Parker, with the help of his friend Faye Ito and old Tony Stark and Riri Williams, to fight Cadaverous and his minions, which includes a cyber-zombified team of Avengers. Number 5. Doc Ock. Okay, so being one of Spider-Man's major arch enemies, Doc Ock has had quite a few different instances of bringing Peter down a peg or two. Today, we're going to talk about the curious case of Otto's adamantium tentacles. So, way back in the day, Dr. Octopus happened to get his hands on some adamantium octopus arms. They were put out of commission and weirdly forgot about for a very long time until they made a spectacular proper return in Spider-Man 1990 issue 18 and issue 19. This is the Revenge of the Sinister Six arc, and not only does Otto manage to make quick work of the entire Sinister Six to take control, even turning the Sandman into glass, when Spider-Man crashes the party, Otto manages to get a hold of him and slam him all over the place, tearing massive holes in Spider-Man's costume and throwing him hundreds of meters away out of the building they were fighting in. He even manages to completely thrash Professor Hulk with these arms too. It's actually kinda nuts. Number 4, the Sandman. Okay, now look, this does absolutely take place in an alternate Earth, but it takes place on Earth Z, with versions of Spider-Man and Sandman who are canonically exactly the same, with all the same abilities as their usual selves. And that makes it terrifying. Allow me to explain. In Marvel Zombies Returns, the zombie heroes Spider-Man and Luke Cage end up on Earth 91126. Zombie Spider-Man thinks he can cure their zombie virus by finding the Lifeline tablet, but just as he is getting underway with the plan, he gets mistaken for this Earth's normal Spider-Man who went to go change his costume. It's really weird. He's then forced into a fight with Dr. Octopus, Electro, Mysterio, Vulture, Kraven, and Sandman, aka the Sinister Six. Despite trying his best to hold back his hunger, Zombie Spider-Man completely lets go and brutalizes the entire squad of villains, with Sandman literally being the only survivor fleeing for his life. So, when the actual normal Spider-Man shows back up and confronts Sandman, having no idea what just happened, the terrified Sandman does not even try to let this Spider-Man anywhere close to him. He slams him ruthlessly with these massive sand mallets before turning into sand and forcing himself into Peter's mouth, landing inside of his stomach, and then bursting Spider-Man from the inside out. Say what you will about the extreme nature of this comic, but this is entirely possible for the Sandman to do anytime he wants, and that is terrifying. Number 3, Electro. The Marvel Knights Spider-Man comic series was written with a more mature slant than previous Spider-Man titles. After a brutal fight with the Green Goblin in which Peter came out on top, Peter gets home only to find his beloved Aunt May has been kidnapped. His ensuing hunt leads him to the Owl, who tells him that Electro and the Vulture were the culprits. In a rage, Spider-Man finds the two and a massive fight breaks out as they're attempting to steal a big old chunk of change. Once their briefcase of money gets launched open, sending the money flying all over the place, Old Max loses his patience and blasts Spider-Man with a massive electroshock that also causes a huge explosion. Now, with Electro revealing his new costume, he manages to get on powerful blasts one after another on Spider-Man, controlling metal objects and firing them all at Spider-Man and innocent bystanders, blowing up cars full of civilians before revealing how his time in prison has allowed him to come up with new ways to use his powers, including ionizing metal, as he literally slams a semi-truck onto Spider-Man. At the end of the fight, Spider-Man learns that the owl tricked him and was only using him for his own needs. In that moment of realization, Electro is able to blast him off of a skyscraper, sending him straight to the emergency room. Number 2. Paul. Paul is straight up just a dick. For those of you who do not know, Paul is a very recent addition to the Spider-Man comics, and he is none other than Mary Jane's new squeeze. He also really randomly happens to have kids with MJ? I don't know, but what I do know is that he is a menace. Paul is the son of Emissary, but from a different reality entirely. That doesn't really matter, he did totally take out the villain himself, so he's not really a villain, but he stole Peter Parker's girl and spent 4 years with her due to time dilation, even adopting 2 kids. He's punched out Peter Parker and was defended by MJ herself. He then had the audacity to pay off some of Peter's medical fees out of sympathy, and then invited him to dinner sometime. Paul and MJ stayed together, and Peter has wanted her back the whole time since, and quite honestly, screw Paul, I hate him. Number 1, Spike. Now, most of you may think you don't know who Spike is, but I promise you, everyone knows who Spike is. Spike just happened to be a low-level criminal burglar operating in New York around the same time that Peter Parker started his journey as Spider-Man. This burglar had been the cellmate of the infamous Depression-era gangster Dutch Malone. In the 1930s, Malone lived in New York City's Forest Hills neighborhood. It was long rumored that Malone had hidden millions of dollars away somewhere in that house, and the burglar heard Malone talking in his sleep about where he hid the money. Spike the burglar next showed up in the hallway of a Manhattan television studio just as the young, naive Spider-Man stepped out of his dressing room. Having robbed the studio's office and being chased by security guard Baxter Bigelow, Spider-Man refused to help, allowing the burglar to make it into the elevator and escape. Turns out this would cost him, as this is the very same burglar who would break into that house in Forest Hills, owned by the Parker family, and accidentally take the life of Uncle Ben, teaching Peter an important lesson about power and responsibility. Kicking off the list at number 10 is Civil War. While there was a clear winner in terms of who won the conflict in Marvel Comics Civil War event, that being Tony Stark, in the grand scheme of things, there really wasn't any winner. The Civil War split the entire superhuman community down the middle. Heroes allied with villains, friends turned on friends, people were manipulated into joining a side, and a few of those people passed away, all for an act that would require the registration and regulation of superhuman individuals following a completely avoidable superhuman-caused catastrophe. And while you had Tony Stark coming out on top, he made a lot of enemies along the way, including Spider-Man, and I don't think he ever intended for the death of Steve Rogers. Also, after he came out on top, he was put in charge of S.H.I.E.L.D. and did a spectacularly bad job, leading to Norman Osborn, of all people, to take over, ushering in a whole lot more of bad. I don't think really anyone came away from Civil War feeling particularly great. Number 9, The Reigning. After the passing of Odin at the hands of Surtur during Dan Jurgens' Thor run from 1998 to 2004, Thor became the new All-Father of Asgard, and he made some pretty interesting choices during this time. One of the biggest decisions he made was moving Asgard to the skies above New York to inspire mortals with its grandeur and to force the world to be better. This triggers a conflict with the governments of Earth, which ultimately ends with the Asgardians conquering the planet and completely wiping out most of the superheroes. The story now shifts 200 years, where Thor now rules over this dystopian future and is no longer worthy of Mjolnir after killing his human counterpart Jake Olsen, symbolically cutting his ties with humanity. There is no more famine or disease, no borders or religion, there's no need to work, and Asgard's magic provides infinite clean energy for the whole planet. But this comes at the cost of making humans become inferior, with a few also planning to rise up against the Asgardians in order to regain their freedom. Thor marries Amora the Enchantress, and they have a son called Magni. Now Magni ends up supporting the humans and the rebellion after seeing how badly the Asgardians are actually treating them. He challenges his father to lift up Mjolnir, proving that he is no longer worthy and leading Thor to question his own actions. After seeing the error of his ways, Thor uses the Odin Jordan forced to go back in time, erasing that whole timeline and making sure the Asgardians never take over Earth. For a character as unstoppable as Thor, his defeat here came in a much more poetic way, and it made for a great story. If you're enjoying this part 2, make sure you get yourself over to our channel to check out part 1, and maybe, if you want to, subscribe while you're at it. Always helps us out here at Top 10 Nerd. Coming in at number 8 is Avengers Infinity War. In the MCU, most of the movies follow a simple idea of a hero facing and eventually defeating a villain, coming out triumphant by the end of the film, completing an arc. Even if the villain survives to continue into another film in the cinematic universe, they are still usually defeated by the hero at the end of their debut movie. Well, when we were given the Avengers Infinity War, it marked the first time in the MCU when the heroes, and furthermore, all the heroes together, officially lost by the end of the movie. Despite their best efforts to stop Thanos from acquiring all the Infinity Stones to complete his mission, he still managed to put them all into his big golden gauntlet and snap out half of the life in the universe. He left the heroes in shock of what even just happened as they watched their friends turn to dust. And when we meet them all again in the next film, Avengers Endgame, they've all been left reeling and trying to move forward from such a massive defeat, which led to one of their greatest victories. Number 7, Shazam in Injustice. In the Injustice game, Superman is the tyrant ruler of the Earth. Most of the other heroes have either joined him or joined Batman as part of an effort to thwart Superman and bring him down. One of the heroes who remained on Superman's side was actually Billy Batson, Shazam. This is surprising to pretty much everyone, but seeing that Billy Batson is only a kid, more susceptible to some manipulation, it starts to make more sense. It also makes it very brutal when Superman takes down Shazam for turning on Superman and mentioning the now dead Lois Lane. Superman takes down Billy frighteningly quick, using his frost breath to freeze Shazam's mouth shut, stopping him from using his signature phrase, and then melting his brain through his eyes with his heat vision. Now, I don't know if this would actually work in any other continuity. I don't see why not, but Shazam has proven himself more than capable to take on Superman. Either way, it made me immediately hate this version of Superman, and it made me pretty darn sad at the same time. Number 6, Magik and Colossus. Now, yes, neither of these guys are villains. Not normally, but they definitely became villains, and that's what we are going to talk about. In the Avengers vs. X-Men event, a group of 5 X-Men were granted quite the power boost in the form of the Phoenix Force, which came to Earth for Hope Summers. Now, thanks to Tony Stark, it was split into 5 parts, and that's when it inhabited the bodies of those 5 X-Men. The mutant siblings Colossus and Magik were 2 of these X-Men. Now, Spider-Man is physically no match for either one of these guys, not with the Phoenix Force at least. When he ended up facing them both in the 9th issue of the event, Spider-Man got completely beaten to a pulp. It was brutal, but of course, he still has that charming personality and beautiful brain. It turns out that when one of the avatars for the Phoenix Force is defeated, the power of the remaining avatars gets boosted up even more, and it ended up that there were only a few of them left. Even though he was completely wrecked, Spider-Man gives them a little innocent reminder of the fact that if one of them is defeated, the other one will gain even more power. Now, we don't get to see the fight that takes place between the 2 of them. Instead, we get to see the unconscious bodies of both of them, with Spider-Man still barely standing to let everyone know he got them to knock each other out. But they still completely wrecked the web slinger. Number 5, the Thunderbolts. Thanks to the MCU, Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland, most people believe that Spider-Man and Tony Stark are as thick as thieves. And they are. In the MCU. There was a time where comic book Tony Stark and Peter Parker got along. In the beginning of the comic book Civil War event, Peter was all for Tony's Superhuman Registration Act, and this was partially because of the way Peter admired Tony Stark. But Iron Man was totally using this admiration to his advantage. He used Peter's naivety to convince Spider-Man to unmask himself to the world, which caused untold amounts of problems for the hero, not only in that story, but even outside of it. It even sort of indirectly led to the split between Peter and Mary Jane Watson. Now, one of Tony's methods for enforcing the Superhuman Registration Act was deputizing villains to hunt down Captain America's forces as the Thunderbolts. When Spider-Man made his getaway from Iron Man's forces, the Thunderbolts were on him like hotcakes, and if it wasn't for the intervention of the Punisher, Peter could have 100% lost his life, and he almost did. Number 4, Carnage. The red symbiotes always seem to be the worst of the worst, and the one that would be born from Venom himself seems to be the worst of the worst of the worst. When Eddie Brock was briefly detached from the Venom symbiote, he was imprisoned, and his cellmate was none other than Cletus Cassidy, a psychotic serving 11 consecutive life sentences in Rikers Island. Now, when Venom showed up and bust Eddie out of prison, it produced its first offspring as a result of Thanos seeking the Infinity Gems out in space, which is the weirdest reason, but that's what happened. Now, Spider-Man learned the hard way that Carnage was absolutely no joke. The Carnage symbiote was not vulnerable to the same things that Venom was, and his strength and speed were greater than both Spider-Man and Venom. Not to mention, he was absolutely ruthless, even more aggressive than Venom, and with all the lethal of Venom and not a smidge of the Protector. The Wall Crawler had to call for help to fight Carnage, and from none other than one of his own villains. Number 3, Venom. That villain that he ended up calling in for help against Carnage was none other than Venom himself. Now, Venom has had an interesting time in comic books, going from villain to anti-hero, back to villain, and now to just straight up a hero. But when he first showed up, he was absolutely just a villain. Eddie Brock and the symbiote shared a personal vendetta against Spider-Man, and they united in their hate for him, literally bonding over it. Venom posed a huge threat to Spider-Man, becoming a villain that gave Peter a run for his money more than once and in more than one medium. The symbiote's unique ability to bypass Spider-Man's spider sense stripped the hero of his primary defense that has helped him on so many other occasions. And on top of that, Venom was even stronger and more durable than Spider-Man, with sharp, pointy teeth and a hell of a lot of extra symbiote abilities that the webhead was just not prepared to deal with. Their initial encounters were intense, with Spider-Man often on the receiving end of brutal beatings. This forced Spider-Man to adapt his fighting style drastically, as the symbiote-covered villain was relentless in his pursuit of the hero's demise. Number 2, Green Goblin. He threw Gwen Stacy off the George Washington Bridge, orchestrated the Clone Saga, and wiped out Ben Reilly right in front of Peter Parker. Norman Osborn is absolutely Spider-Man's #1 adversary, simply for the fact that he has caused Peter more emotional pain than any of his other villains, even Doc Ock. Now, obviously, everything that I mentioned was Norman, but Harry Osborn was also the Green Goblin, adding physical and emotional turmoil to the whole thing. Now, I don't think I need to pick one event in particular, but I would say that Gwen Stacy was the worst of the bunch. Green Goblin proved to Spider-Man that he is not able to save everyone. Even though Peter was so close, he still failed, and when you think about it, Green Goblin made it so that Peter was the one to shoot the web that broke Gwen's back. He may not have known that's how it would go down, but he lucked out with that move, not only terrorizing Peter, but completely psychologically tormenting the poor guy. And finally, in at #1 today, it's the Spot. Jonathan Owen is a villain that only well-versed fans of Spider-Man would recognize, or it used to be that way before Across the Spider-Verse came out. Now, as the Spot, Jonathan hasn't always been the most relevant villain of Peter Parker. He often ends up on lists of Spider-Man's worst and unknown villains. I mean, when he first confronted Spider-Man and announced his villain moniker in Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man Volume 1, Issue 99 in 1985, the hero hit the ground laughing. Literally, he fell on the ground and was laughing. It was bad. But it made it all the more embarrassing for Spider-Man when the Spot actually defeated him. Spot threw Peter in and out of his dimensions using his hole portals, and he landed more than a few good punches on the hero. The Spot doesn't hit hard, but as he says, even the strongest of trees can be felled by sufficient strokes from even the smallest of hatchets. Yes, he said that. I know it's weird. Eventually, he left Peter discombobulated, with Black Cat having to help him back to his feet. He got his own back eventually, but still, the Spot took him down. Number 10, the Hulk. Now, we're starting off this list with a big one. I could have easily chosen all of my spots from when Deadpool killed the Marvel Universe, but while Deadpool has defeated the Hulk and many others, that's not actually canon. But luckily, we do have a canon example of when Deadpool defeated the Hulk. This took place in the 1997 volume of Deadpool in issue #4, when Deadpool needed to challenge the Hulk to get some of his blood in order to counteract the gamma radiation that was affecting Deadpool. The Hulk at this time was making Duck Key his own little paradise, and Deadpool, scared out of his wits, went in this fight just trying to ask for some of the green stuff coursing through the Hulk's veins. Unsurprisingly, the Hulk was not about it. After trying his darndest to get what he wanted, the Hulk was just a bit too much for Wade to handle, so he came up with a cunning plan. As the Hulk jumped up into the air, probably planning to squash Wade when he came back down, Deadpool positioned a broken post on the ground just so perfectly that the Hulk wound up impaling himself right on it when he landed. Now normally this isn't supposed to be possible, and Deadpool makes note of that fact, but apparently the Hulk was a little sick at this point in time, and Wade gets what he wants and gets the heck out of Dodge while he still has the chance. Number 9, Black Panther. So basically what happens here in Black Panther vs. Deadpool number 4 is that Mr. Poole heads to Wakanda to steal a bit of vibranium to help heal a mailman. Yes, that is the actual reason. Okay, so Black Panther manages to de-head the merc and then put him back together, restraining him and going through his stuff, particularly his utility belt pouches, in a Wakandan lab. Now as these two are having a very entertaining back and forth, Deadpool reveals that he has pulled a fast one on T'Challa as he has some C4 in one of those pouches on a timer that is about to go off. Which it does, since there are way too many pouches for T'Challa to find it in time, which is hilarious. Wade actually ends up grabbing a red ceremonial Wakandan necklace and putting it on. Now this was actually a prototype Panther habit. The suit analyzes his DNA, and since Black Panther has everybody's DNA on file, it bestows itself onto Deadpool. It remakes itself on Deadpool, adapting to his usual color scheme and the weapons that he likes to use, christening himself Pantherpool, or Dead Panther. No, Pantherpool. Pantherpool's better. It also pretty much brings him up to par with the true Black Panther, which is proven when the two get into a bit of fisticuffs, until Wade's pocket-sized teleporter activates and he teleports to the Great Mound, aka the vibranium mine of Wakanda, which he then accidentally teleports to right outside New Jersey, the whole mountain. Number 8, Wolverine. Deadpool and Wolverine first met in 1994's Wolverine number 88. Now while Wolverine may be stronger, Deadpool's speed, healing factor, his skill in combat, and his absolutely buck-wild behavior has allowed him to get the drop on Wolverine and do a lot of damage many different times. In their first ever encounter, the Merc with a Mouth ambushes Wolverine while he's checking up on Garrison Kane, who's another Weapon X experiment. Now during the ensuing fight, Deadpool earned his reputation as one of Marvel Comics' most brutal mutants by stabbing his two swords into Wolverine's heart and lungs. Now while this typically wouldn't phase the healing mutant, Wolverine had recently lost his healing factor during a bout with Magneto. Now thankfully for Wolverine, his healing factor had begun to slowly return in the days leading up to this fight with Deadpool, allowing him to survive the wounds he'd suffered and win a rematch later on, but he even needed help to do that. It was brutal. Number 7, Daredevil. Now, I wasn't able to find and read the actual comic that this page comes from, but I do know it is in Marvel Now issue number 11, so if you can give me more context to this moment, feel free to do so down in the comments. Essentially, Daredevil had managed to capture Wade and hog-tie him up. As Daredevil is talking with some civilians, Daredevil breaks his own fingers to escape from his confines. He then asks Daredevil where the nearest hospital is. That would be Mount Sinai Medical Center, about 5 blocks away from where they were. Deadpool tells DD that he better get a move on, as Deadpool then, out of nowhere, blasts one of the civilians in the leg. Now Daredevil is obviously pretty peed off about this, as Deadpool damaged the civvy's femoral artery, but luckily for Daredevil, Deadpool heard Mount Sinai Medical Center is about 5 blocks away. As Deadpool storms off with Daredevil saying this isn't over, all Deadpool can say back in retort is BRB JK LOL. It's kind of funny. Not gonna lie. Number 6, Ultimate Spider-Man. Ultimate Spider-Man is one of the most beloved Spider-Man runs ever, which made The Death of Spider-Man such a hard comic to read. Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, escapes the Triskelion along with Dr. Octopus, Sandman, Kraven the Hunter, Electro, and Vulture, and hides in an apartment building near Central Park. With S.H.I.E.L.D. occupied by an explosion, Osborn tells the 6 sinister villains that it's the perfect time to do God's work and finally take out Spider-Man. Now Otto objects to this plan, but Norman overpowers Otto and deals a fatal blow to him. Learning Learning this, Peter heads to where the battle took place to find Otto's body. He goes off to investigate where Norman was off said to be, but when he leaves, he ends up spotting Captain America standing over a beaten Nick Fury and sees the Punisher aiming a rifle at Cap. That's all part of a separate issue, but he immediately dives towards Cap and pushes him out of the way, taking the bullet on himself. Now, while it wasn't fatal, in his weakened state, he had a much harder time facing off against Green Goblin and his collected villains. Peter puts up one hell of a heroic fight with the help of Aunt May, the Human Torch, and Mary Jane, taking out pretty much everyone until he faces this super amped up version of Green Goblin. Fighting on his last legs, he's helped out by Mary Jane, who shares one last kiss with Peter before he defeats the Goblin and then suffers his final blow from an explosion. He then passes away in the arms of Mary Jane in a pretty iconic panel, and now I want to cry. So that's great. Number 5. Countdown to Infinite Crisis. I think we can all agree that it's incredibly rare to see a mainline superhero taken out of the picture. And if it does happen, it's usually in a huge blaze of glory like Spider-Man up there, or an incredibly tragic moment, or after a long momentous battle with cancer in the case of Marvel's Mar-Vell. So when Ted Kord, Blue Beetle, was erased from existence thanks to a bullet from a barrel at the hands of Maxwell Lord in the Countdown to Infinite Crisis, it was pretty bad. After following Ted the whole book as he struggles for anyone in the Justice League to take him seriously, while he's correctly on the trail of Maxwell Lord and learning of all his misuse of both the Justice League's files, Batman's Brother's Eye satellite, and the OMAX, you'd expect Kord to come out surviving, having a cathartic moment where he finally gets the League's respect or to make a dent in Lord's plans, but instead, he gets snuffed out like a tea light candle that hadn't even begun to make the wax melt. It's abrupt, it's brutal, and it made me legitimately sad to read it. Number 4. House of M. Look, there is getting completely clobbered, losing life or loved ones, going down the path of a tyrant, and turning on one another, and that all happens in House of M. The kicking off point for this story was a defeat all of its own, the heroes being completely helpless as the Scarlet Witch completely rewrote reality. Now, while she gave everyone pretty much exactly what they all wanted and made mutants the dominant race on the Earth, she robbed the world of their free will and had them all living a complete lie. And when that lie was uncovered, the Scarlet Witch lost more than she already had. Blaming that loss on her inclusion as a mutant, she spoke the 3 little words of no more mutants, and all at once, the mutant species suffered one of its most devastating defeats. All at once, 986,618 mutants were depowered, leaving some in situations that saw them lose their lives, thanks to the decimation. It was first estimated that 91.4% of the world's mutant population lost their powers overnight, leaving less than 200 mutants in the world. The Xavier Institute's mutant students count went down from 182 to just 27. This left mutants on the brink of complete extinction. Number 3. Hush. Batman has a bit of a habit for being infallible. Or at least I think that's what he likes to tell himself. So, when someone gets the better of him, it hurts. But when that someone is a childhood best friend, I can imagine it hurts quite a bit more. In the 2003 story Batman Hush, Bruce Wayne's childhood friend, Dr. Tommy Elliot, comes back to Gotham, but unbeknownst to Bruce, Tommy has a plan in place. Working with the Riddler and a large array of Batman's rogues gallery, including Killer Croc, Clayface, Harley Quinn, Poison Ivy, and even the Joker, Tommy orchestrates a huge plan manipulating events and those closest to Bruce Wayne to leave Batman distracted, outsmarted, paranoid, and ultimately subdued. He uses intimate details of Bruce's life against him in an attempt to take down Batman and have him unmasked at Arkham Asylum, all in some weird attempt for revenge against Bruce's father and a promise made by baby Bruce. Now, if it wasn't for the intervention of Jim Gordon and a reformed Two-Face, Batman would have completely lost, being broken down over the course of the story by his old friend. Number 2. Pain of the Gods. If we are talking devastating defeats, a really good place to look would be issues 101 to 106 of JLA from 2004, a storyline titled Pain of the Gods that details each member of the Justice League's biggest failures. It is absolutely depressing, but on the bright side, perfect for this list. It kicks off with Superman, who arrives to save people trapped in a burning building. Now, an unnamed hero shows up to lend a hand while Superman saves those inside, and he brings them to safety until an explosion goes off, burning the other superhero to a crisp. The second issue follows Flash as he fails to save two younger people from a burning building, finding them when it was too late and the smoke inhalation had got them. He then goes around the city installing fire detectors in every single house, getting mad at a family who didn't find time to go install a new battery. In issue 3, we see John Stewart, Green Lantern, trapped between two separate domestics. He rushes to one and prevents it, but when he makes it to the other, it was arguably worse and resulted in a loss of life. The next issue follows Martian Manhunter, but this time it's more of his failings to understand the emotion that we experience as humans and his alienation from that, and the pain of losing his entire species. It's really interesting, honestly, but moving on to issue 105, this one follows Wonder Woman, and for the Amazon, it was an extremely close near-death experience at the hands of a new supervillain that drove her down a path of needing some emotional support. Now, each issue ends with the team coming together for each other as a support system, and it's actually really sweet. And it all wraps up in the final issue with a story that was happening alongside everything else I talked about, but I'll leave that for you to read for yourself because it's really cool and I think you'll like it. And finally, in at number 1, it's Nightfall. There are many deranged and off-the-wall villains in Batman's rogues gallery, and while the Dark Knight has suffered losses and defeats at the hands of a few, none of those defeats are as infamous as the one he suffered at the hands of Bane. By issue 11 of the Broken Bat part of the arc, Bane had managed to find out that Bruce Wayne was indeed Batman. Bane surprised Bruce at his home, pumped himself with venom, and laid a brutal beatdown on the Dark Knight in his own home. The fight continued on into the Batcave, and being completely taken by surprise, Batman is on his last legs when the venom-fueled tank of a man lifted Batman over his head and dropped him spine first onto his massive back-breaking knee. This brutal move, captured in one of the most iconic panels ever, put the Batman completely out of commission, requiring him to choose another to fill his role as the protector of Gotham until he could make his final triumphant return.
Number 10. Captain America. Sure, this Captain America wasn't exactly the hero of the story, as we'd later find out the Captain America wasn't really himself, but rather another twisted version that was created by Kobik, fragments of the Cosmic Cube who fused together to create a sentient being, a little girl. This was due to a misunderstanding where Kobik thought that Captain America would be a better hero if he was basically indoctrinated into Hydra. She hadn't intended necessarily to make him evil, she was just kind of being manipulated by Red Skull, who she actually thought was like a good person, but she was wrong, and she thought Hydra was good. At the same time, Deadpool didn't know any of this and just thought Cap was Cap. He decided to ally himself with Captain America during the events leading up to Secret Empire, but would eventually come to realize that Captain America, aka Hydra Supreme, had really been using and manipulating him. Probably the worst and most humbling of all on our list. This made Deadpool question virtually all of his actions during this period. Not like a punch you in the face humble, but definitely a form of humbling. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, I encourage you, yes you, to click that like button. It really does help us out here at the channel and it feeds the algorithm. Praise be the algorithm. Number 9. Agent Coulson. So he didn't really get beaten by Agent Coulson, but I think considering the fallout of Secret Empire for Deadpool in retrospect, he would have been humbled by, I guess, his actions against Phil Coulson. And sure, Phil Coulson isn't always a hero in the comics. Let's not forget when he ended up being kind of one of the big bads during the 2021 Heroes Reborn event. That was honestly weird for me to read, but mostly I'd say that Phil Coulson tends to be a hero, like in general. And in this case, he really was trying to be a hero. He had intel on Captain America and believed that Stephen had been compromised, and he was right. He was hoping to get this info out so, you know, something could be done before it was too late, but it turned out that Rogers was onto him and sent Deadpool to take out Coulson. While Deadpool was ultimately successful in his mission, it wasn't easy for him to follow this order as he didn't really even know why Captain America needed Phil dead. Later on, he'd learned the truth about Captain America's allegiance when he became Hydra Supreme, and how this Captain America wasn't the same one that we'd always known. This would make Deadpool question everything he'd done during this era, including including of course this initial mission for Cap, where it all started, baby. Number 8. Cyclops. Cyclops ended up humbling Deadpool when he refused his offer to become an X-Men member. However, Cyclops would kind of agree to offer Deadpool a place on the team temporarily, but Deadpool would later learn that this was actually only done so that the X-Men could keep an eye on Wade, as basically they didn't trust him. Ouch. After he learned that, after everything he went through to try to help them, he was basically just like, you know what, I don't need you guys. Oh. Poor Wade. So he's left out of the X-Men club. Number 7. Hulk. This one at least isn't too embarrassing for Deadpool, considering he literally wanted to be beaten here. Hulk ended up fighting Deadpool in the 2008 Deadpool series in issue number 38 and 39, and Deadpool actually wanted Hulk to smash him. No, not smash him like that. Although for Deadpool saying this to Hulk, I mean, you maybe never know which version he meant. If he asked you to smash him, you'd be like, wait. Even for Hulk, I feel like I could see the two of them together. Is that weird? I don't know. Deadpool basically wanted to be destroyed, so he told the Hulk that the only way to stop bombs from going off was to beat him up. Deadpool claimed he had a transmitter surgically implanted inside him that would use the electrical current of his body to power itself, sending signals to a new nuke every hour to detonate. Of course, none of this was true. He was just hoping the Hulk would take him out permanently. Unfortunately for Deadpool, despite intentionally losing the fight, his healing factor still went out here.
Number 6. Daredevil again. This time I was able to find and read the actual comic. Yay! Okay, so back in the 1990s, it was quite common for comics to feature iconic duels and let the readers decide the outcomes through a voting system. 1999's Contest of Champions Volume 2 Number 4 is a perfect example of this, when Daredevil faces off against Deadpool. Deadpool does not fight fair. We know this to be true from the last point, and Daredevil should too. The problem for Daredevil is that he's just too much of a good guy hero. Deadpool takes complete advantage of that fact by throwing a very tiny wrapped up fresh little human off of the roof that the two are fighting on. When Daredevil naturally rushes to save the little one, he goes careening off of the building, catching the wrapped up kid, and he lands in a dumpster. This is when he realizes that the kid was actually not a kid at all, but a doll of Deadpool with a tape recorder of, and I quote, authentic fake baby noisemaker guaranteed to fool superheroes every time, end quote. This is when Deadpool pops up behind Matt Murdock with his fully loaded placed squarely on DD's noggin. Luckily we cut away before Wade finishes the job, but he got him pretty good there. Number 5. Hawkeye. Okay, now to be clear, this isn't actually Hawkeye who Wade is humbling here. This is taking place during the period of time when Norman Osborn is in charge of what he called Hammer, and he has his Dark Avengers. So this is technically Bullseye dressed up as Hawkeye, just so we're clear. Now I've talked about another moment from 2008's Deadpool before, where he and Bullseye fought in a meat factory, and that was also humbling for Hawkeye / Bullseye, but this is on another level. It's also very short and sweet, so that's nice. So in the very next issue, after Bullseye recovers from their last fight in the meat factory, he sets up a trap for Deadpool, who had set up a trap for him. They made a trap for each other. Instead, Deadpool gets very frustrated and just goes out to find Lester on his own. Now driving in a massive truck with huge massive wheels, he passes under a highway bridge where Hawkeye / Bullseye was waiting with a rocket launcher. He fires this at Deadpool, who sees it coming in the rearview mirror, and then he slams on the brakes, drifts the car sideways while rolling down the windows, allowing the rocket to just smoothly fly through the cab of the vehicle and out the opposite window, blowing up in the distance. And all Bullseye / Hawkeye can do is admit how awesome it was. Because it was awesome. It was super cool. Number 4. All of the heroes. Literally all of them. In Marvel's Dark Ages, the awakening of a cosmic war machine known as the Unmaker forced Doctor Strange to create a magically induced electromagnetic pulse that permanently shut down all electronic devices, plunging the world into darkness. Now from the moment the mutant Apocalypse became aware of the Unmaker and the celestial level power the ancient machine possessed, he made it his mission to reawaken it and claim that power for himself. Now knowing that he couldn't accomplish that by himself, Apocalypse kidnapped many many of the world's greatest inventors and used the Purple Man's mind control abilities to force them to create a device that would allow him to merge his mind with the Unmakers. Now that is all really hard to follow, and I'm sorry, but when the heroes made their way to Europe, where Apocalypse was doing all of this, they were met by Deadpool, who acted as their guide, bringing them all the way to Apocalypse's setup in Paris. With Purple Man controlling a whole squad of mind-controlled heroes, the good guys were gonna have a hard time fighting them, except out of nowhere, Deadpool just pops a cap in Purple Man's dome, ending Purple Man's control over not just the heroes fighting them, but the ones inside helping Apocalypse with his machine. Now, Deadpool gets scolded by the other heroes because apparently Jessica Jones and Luke Cage were gonna knock Purple Man out, but if they had waited any longer, Apocalypse would have been able to complete his plan, so I'd say that Deadpool was right to do what he did. Number 3. Spider-Man. So kicking off right at the beginning of Deadpool Suicide Kings issue number 4, Deadpool is waking up from a characteristically weird dream where he is Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz with Daredevil, Spider-Man, and Punisher as the Cowardly Lion, Scarecrow, and the Tin Man, respectively. That all comes to an end with Tin Man Punisher taking out a little munchkin and Deadpool waking up in the Essex house distraught and met by Daredevil and Spider-Man. Now in the previous issue, Punisher had just blown the head off of Deadpool, so in his re-healing state, Deadpool is still working to get some of his synapses firing, and Spider-Man makes the little joke of, quote, "So what was your excuse before your head exploded? Ha ha ha," which is kind of funny actually. But then Deadpool says Spidey should be off facing one of his mortal enemies, like the 90-year-old Vulture, or the "hey everyone, I'm really tall, I fight on stilts, Stilt Man," or whatever the hell Gibbon is supposed to be. But then Deadpool goes even more obscure with a reference to the villain Mindworm, who was a big-headed mutant that fed on people's emotions, and then he referenced the kangaroo. Now of course Spidey had his own little jabs back, but it kind of feels like when you're the kid getting roasted and you try to come up with anything to try and gain some dignity back and it doesn't work, that's what happened. Number 2. The Punisher. Now sticking with that same comic, and even actually that same issue, now closer towards the end, Deadpool comes into contact with the Punisher, who, if you remember and were paying attention, it's cool if you weren't, in the previous issue had blown off Wade's head. Now this was for a crime that Wade did not actually commit, so when they next come to blows inside of a club, Wade is a bit more prepared. Seeing Punisher in a reflection on a mirror, Deadpool is able to give Frank a good old kick in the gut and then send him flying out of one of the club's doors into an alleyway where the fight carries on, and honestly, it's pretty close and a very ruthless fight. Deadpool kind of has the upper hand in his speed, but they both get knocked to the ground. For me, it's the moment where Deadpool is on the ground and he sees Castle as Satan for like a split second. He grabs Punisher by his hair and just slams him face first into the pavement, breaking the guy's nose. In return, Punisher bites off Deadpool's nose, and the whole fight sort of ends in a draw when Punisher finds out Deadpool is innocent and they go off to interrogate some criminals. Now this is the main humbling moment in my opinion. Frank is interrogating a criminal who is clearly lying, but before Frank can do anything, Deadpool blasts the guy's foot off, and when Frank asks why, Deadpool says, "Because you were going to do it and this is my book," leaving Frank completely confused as to what's going on. And in at number 1 today, it's Captain America. The villain Dr. Bong was a goofy villain, even during the Golden Age. He has a metal ball where his left hand should be, and he uses it to create concussive blasts by striking the appendage against his bell-shaped head. That's actually what he does. Luckily though, for him, in 2010's Deadpool Volume 2, the villain was reimagined just a smidge more threateningly, having cloned a team of regenerating superheroes and also revealing himself as Deadpool's former therapist. One of these clones was Captain America, so yes, this wasn't the genuine Captain America, but he had the same appearance as the original, and seemingly he had the same abilities as well, and Deadpool sure thought he was the original. The two of these guys fought in a fair bout at first, but Deadpool felt rejected and hurt by Cap in issue number 28. After the fight is interrupted when Deadpool clearly had the upper hand, Dr. Bong demolishes the building they're all in. When everyone comes back to again in the next issue, Deadpool has everyone tied up, including the Captain America clone and the original Captain America. Through some clever interrogation and deductive reasoning about the injuries both of these Caps has sustained, he realizes that one Captain America had healed from his injuries and the other had not, making the first one Cloney McCloneface, and Deadpool blows that face off. It is bad.
Number 10. Black Widow. The Avengers in the Ultimate Universe are different from their main continuity counterparts, as while the Avengers in 616 are a team of bona fide heroes brought together by massive and often global threats, the Avengers of Earth 1610 were brought together by Nick Fury, and are often a team composed of former villains and kinda anti-heroes, people less marketable generally than 1610's Ultimates, which are like the equivalent to the 616's Avengers. Instead, the Avengers from 1610 end up becoming more comparable to DC's Suicide Squad, a team of reluctant participants who are forced to work together to complete missions for S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury. Monica Chang, however, was not one of the more criminal-based members of the team, and instead was the new Black Widow. She was given the mantle of Black Widow after the death of Natasha, who it turned out was a traitor to S.H.I.E.L.D., the Ultimates, and the USA. Monica was with the Avengers team from day one, joining them on their first mission to apprehend Steve Rogers, aka Captain America, and locate and put a stop to the Red Skull. Monica doesn't have any superpowers, but is a trained agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. She is a skilled spy, combatant, and is experienced with various types of firearms, though typically is known for wielding 2 pistols. While wearing her Stark suit, she also possessed enhanced strength and speed. However, she was still a normal human, and as such was still able to be killed fairly easily when she went up against the immortal Green Goblin. Poor Monica though, I feel like that whole thing kinda did her dirty because, you know, she actually survived for a long time prior to that. So it was really weird that she was like, I'm gonna go into this fight and I'm gonna be super unprepared. Hey, then you die. That's what happens. Monica should know that. Number 9. The Punisher. The Punisher in the reality of Earth 1610 was a member of both Nick Fury's Howling Commandos, who fought against the Maker's Dark Ultimates, and a member of Fury's Avengers. The Punisher's powers are basically the same as his Earth 616 counterpart. In other words, he doesn't really have any superpowers. He's mostly just a man who is really skilled in his use of various firearms. He was a trained police officer with the NYPD, so has lots of tactical training and experience. The first time he joined the Avengers, it was to protect the Vice President against Ghost Rider, but the spirit of vengeance convinced Frank to stand down, and even assist him in the end, also helping him to escape. The Punisher would also escape S.H.I.E.L.D. custody following the mission, but would later be recruited once more by Fury after he ended up in prison. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, if you want more Ultimate lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Also, check out our Ultimate Marvel Universe playlist for more videos like this. Number 8. Red Wasp. Red Wasp initially went by the name of Swarm and was a member of the antagonistic Liberators team. She was believed to have been killed in the fight between the Liberators and the Ultimates by the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne, who became giant and stepped on Swarm. However, Petra Laskov managed to survive, saved by S.H.I.E.L.D. and put into rehabilitation by them. Rehabilitation. She was made to work for them and join up with their Avengers team. They even placed an obedience chip within her to make sure that she followed orders. Rehabilitation. During her time with S.H.I.E.L.D., Petra would take up the mantle Red Wasp. She can shrink herself down to the size of an insect and can control large swarms of insects as well. However, because of her insect-like abilities, she can also be defeated using insect repellent. So, pretty cool powers, but with a pretty big weakness. Number 7. Blade. Blade was recruited to the Avengers by Nick Fury, who promised to deliver him Deacon Frost in exchange for his service. Frost is the man responsible for killing Blade's mother and turning him into the creature that he is, in case you didn't know that. Blade helped to apprehend Tyrone Cash after S.H.I.E.L.D. learned he was responsible for selling off their super soldiers on the black market. Blade incapacitated Cash through hypnosis. Ooh, supernatural powers. However, despite him being part vampire, Blade is not as tough as you'd expect, especially in comparison to the tough version of the character we know from the Earth 616. Iron Man found that out when he basically crushed the poor anti-hero. Blade's time serving as part of the Ultimate Avengers may have also helped to get him on the main continuity Avengers team of Earth 616 in the future. I also gotta say, I really love Blade as an addition to the 616 Avengers. I don't know if everybody else is super enjoying that, but I'm really enjoying that. Are you enjoying that? I hope you are. Number 6. Nick Fury. Another great thing that the Ultimate Universe gave us was a new Nick Fury that was so successful he actually became the new version of Nick Fury in the main continuity, and inspired the MCU version of the character as well. Hilariously enough, Samuel L. Jackson's likeness inspired the redesign of the character. Fury would even acknowledge that Jackson would be his top pick to play him in a movie. The story goes that originally Samuel L. Jackson was actually not too happy about Marvel using his likeness without really asking him or without any compensation or conversation about it, but when he contacted them, they actually apologized and offered him the role of Nick Fury in any future films. Jackson supposedly was appeased and accepted the offer, and the rest, they say, is history. Today, I personally cannot imagine the MCU without him. Number 5, Death. Wait a minute, Amanda, didn't you just cite death as being a bad thing on your worst list? Yes, I did. We were talking about Ultimatum. But that was more death for the sake of death, not death in general. I actually enjoy when characters die. Well, I don't enjoy when they die, but more that I enjoy the finality that death invites. I like death as consequences, but more than that, I like the higher stakes that it gives us. If anyone at any point can die, it means that everything is more exciting because, you know, they might not make it back from that mission. Their actions carry more weight because there's a real risk that they face. When characters can die, it also means stories get to end, and with endings come new and exciting beginnings. Number 4, The Maker. Talk about unique spins on characters. The Maker definitely offered us a completely different take on Reed Richards, one that was more modern and actually felt like it kind of fit better, not just within the world, but within a more current day and age. I think a huge issue with the Fantastic Four that we see when it comes to adapting that team to sort of a film setting in the modern day is that the heroes are kind of stiff. They're definitely a product of the time period in which they were created, a perfect and kind of wholesome family unit. The Ultimate Universe shattered that expectation, broke up the Fantastic Four team, and gave us the amazing villain that is the Maker, a version of Reed Richards whose love and dedication to science actually makes him a horrifying, immoral, pretty much mad scientist type, if a mad scientist could somehow also be like disturbingly sane and logical. The Maker is one of the best villains to have ever existed in comics in general, not even just within the confines of the Ultimate Universe, which of course the Maker would also literally break free from in the comics. Number 3, Ultimate Spider-Man. Although there were many problems when it came to the continuity of the Ultimate Universe, the Spider-Man series was not one of them. In fact, Ultimate Spider-Man was more celebrated for being a breath of fresh air that remained consistently coherent throughout. To this day, it remains some fans' favorite Spider-Man comic series, period, and not just one of their favorite series within the Ultimate Universe. Some even hold this series above any of the Spider-Man main continuity stuff. Why was the Spider-Man series so good from Ultimates? It had a sense of finality, and it wasn't wishy-washy. It committed, it followed through, it offered fresh new takes on characters, and whether or not you loved all of those new takes, you had to respect them. Most of those changes were made to make Spider-Man's stories and characters feel more grounded, more realistic. Peter also returned to high school, which a lot of fans enjoyed because they felt it was younger Peter, Spider-Man in high school, that was kind of his most relatable version. So taking him back there felt really good. Number 2, Miles Morales. One of the greatest things to come out of Ultimate Spider-Man as well, the story and character of Miles Morales, whom we've all come to love very dearly. What's more, Peter's apparent death also paved the way for Miles, allowing him to step into the spotlight as Spider-Man, and even take over. Even after we learned that Peter Parker had actually survived as well and wasn't actually dead due to the Oz formula making him virtually immortal, he still decided to pass the torch to Miles. He'd had his time as a hero, now it was Miles' turn. I just love how the story goes. I love that Miles truly got to be the one and only Spider-Man on Earth 1610. And while I love Peter, I kind of hope we get to see Miles step into the spotlight as the one and only Spider-Man at some point on Earth 616 too. Or bring back a world where he is the one and only Spider-Man. Number 1, the MCU. The Ultimate line is what helped to pave the way for the MCU, and in fact provided much needed inspiration for the cinematic universe. There are many characters from Earth 1610 who have influenced their Earth 199999 counterparts. that is, their Marvel Cinematic Universe counterparts. Not only have characters from the Ultimate Universe found their way to the big screen through the MCU, but stories from the Ultimate line have also served to inspire some of those told to us in the films.
Number 10. Maximus the Mad. I just like the look of Maximus the Mad here. We don't get to see too much of him or the other Inhumans, but what I like about him and them is kind of just that. They're more alluring when they're kept mysterious. Maximus, in case you didn't know, is the brother to Black Bolt. In the Earth 616 universe, he is known as Maximus the Mad, as I believe he's also known here. He is often depicted as such in terms of his appearance in the 616 continuity, and is also made to look somewhat more flamboyant in comparison to his Earth 1610, his Ultimate Universe counterpart. I do love that Maximus just looks like a normal dude in the Ultimate Universe, because also I just feel like just because you're mad doesn't mean you look different, you know what I mean? You just look normal. I think that actually makes him more frightening to me as well, that he just looks so normal, so average, especially among the rest of the Inhumans, who all look pretty freaky, stand out, and honestly somewhat monstrous here. This more bleak take on the whole group in the Ultimate Universe makes me want to see a film version of them that was more of like a supernatural horror, especially considering they consider Attilan to actually be like a heaven here, yet it's so dark. I believe based on this depiction, there could be promise in something like a supernatural horror film version of them. Number 9. Gregory Stark. Sorry Arno, move over, Gregory is here. I like Arno Stark, okay, but Gregory was a pretty cool villain to have, and he wasn't the secret brother of Iron Man either. Gregory is actually not just known, he's often more well liked than Tony is in the Ultimate Universe, at least initially. Tony is seen as being a bit of a loose cannon in comparison to his older twin brother, you see, who constantly has things way more together and is also super wicked smart. But that also works well for Gregory's character, as he also turns out to be, you guessed it, a bad guy. Of course, no one can be that good. We should have known. Gregory manipulated S.H.I.E.L.D. in order to get full control of it, and when all the pieces were in play, basically attempted to take over the world. He had to be taken out by Tony Stark, but in a much more permanent way than Tony when he dealt with Arno in the Earth 616 reality. Tony, in part, actually helped to kill his brother. He used an EMP to disrupt his nanites, which made Gregory critically vulnerable to an attack from Thor. Ouch. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list, be sure to head on over to Facebook to show us some love, where you can give us a follow, a like, and check out all the cool content we have over there. Number 8. Crystal. I really love the original Crystal, especially in terms of her appearance, but I also do love the super rebellious vibes we get from Earth 1610 Ultimate Crystal in this narrative. Here, Crystal is still the little sister of Medusa, but this group of Inhumans, Medusa included, are even less likely to mingle with humans. They simply want to live a completely separate and simple life, which bothers Crystal, who it seems is searching for something more, something outside of her own family. Acting out, she runs away from her people, not eager to play the loyal member of the royal court, and not fond of her fiance, Black Bolt's brother, Maximus the Mad. Yeah, they're engaged in this reality. She runs into the Fantastic Four, and in so doing kind of reveals to them the secret location of Attilan as they pursue her after she is retrieved by her people. Crystal ends up deciding to stay with the Inhumans too, despite her unhappiness, which I also think is an interesting choice, and it gets me wanting to know more about both Crystal and the Inhumans in this universe. Cause like the Fantastic Four were also just like, you come chill with us, but she's like, nah, this is how it's gotta be, even though I definitely was not super here for this, but I still gotta stick with my fam. Number 7. Nick Fury. The Nick Fury of the Ultimate Universe Earth 1610 isn't perfect. In fact, he can kind of seem like he's being a butt a lot of the time, but in reality, it's just that Nick Fury often doesn't trust people. He keeps his plans and reasons behind them close to his chest, and while you might not understand them and therefore think he's callous, he's often just trying to make the hard call. Nick Fury has some flaws, I'll grant you, especially if we're talking about his relationship with his ex-wife and everything that apparently went wrong there. But this version of the character would become so beloved that he actually go on to inspire an Earth 616 counterpart in Nick Fury Jr., and of course would inspire the version of the character we saw up on the big screen in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where he was portrayed by the one and only Samuel L. Jackson. Samuel L. Jackson in fact also served as inspiration for the 1610 counterpart in the comics when it came to his appearance, and Mr. Jackson was actually the character's first pick of course, when asked in canon who would be best to portray him in a film. Number 6. Hawkeye. But wait a minute, isn't Hawkeye a member of the Ultimates? Well, yes, he has been that too, but hey, he can do both. Hawkeye, despite being more of a bona fide hero, still had a pretty shady past, which was what made him a great candidate for the Avengers team. Nick Fury invited him to join originally when they went on the hunt for Red Skull, and Barton agreed. In fact, I believe Hawkeye actually helped to bring this team together as well. The Avengers team for him was like a Black Ops group willing to do the dirty work that the Ultimates couldn't be seen getting involved in. Often this meant the villains they went after usually ended up dead. Such was the case with Red Skull in the end. Hawkeye might just seem like a guy with a bow, and well, he is. But he is really good with that bow. He has enhanced vision, which allows him to see much farther and clearer than your average human, and he is an extremely skilled fighter, pilot, and spy. So, you know. Also, he's deadly with fingernails, so watch yourself if you're just facing him as he is. If he's got fingernails, he's got weapons. Number 5. War Machine. War Machine is James Rhodes, who became a close friend to Iron Man and ended up being gifted a suit of armor from Tony to use in his own heroic adventures. He would end up being recruited and serve on the revived Avengers project as a member of the team during their first mission, where they attempted to defeat and capture Red Skull. Rhodey happened to be armed with a nuke to use against the Red Skull as part of a last resort plan, if needed. But the Red Skull had overheard about this plan and said nuke, and so managed to disable it easily using the Cosmic Cube. Honestly, if the Red Skull didn't have the Cosmic Cube though at this time, my money would have definitely been on War Machine in this fight, because War Machine I think is pretty powerful. War Machine would also for a time gain temporary Hulk-like powers after being given some of Tyrone Cash's Hulk serum. Number 4. Nerd Hulk. While Nerd Hulk is a very powerful character in terms of his abilities being on the same level of power as Bruce Banner's Hulk from Earth 1610, he tends to end up being not so powerful in actuality when battling other people. This is because he has a tendency to hold back though. Nerd Hulk is a clone that Gregory Stark, Tony Stark's brother, created. Nerd Hulk prefers to try and resolve conflicts using logic as opposed to violence, and it is the marriage of his intellect and strength combined that holds him back from being as deadly as he could be. Still, the potential is there, and he does have access to the same amount of strength and ferocity as Banner if he'd only feel inclined to use it. Nerd Hulk was a member of the Avengers team when they were first resurrected and went after Red Skull. He would also later attempt to join the Ultimates, but he was denied membership. Sad. Poor Nerd Hulk. I love him with his little glasses. Number 3. Gregory Stark. Gregory Stark is like the evil brother of Tony Stark. He is the more immoral of the two when it comes to technology, but is more put together overall in comparison to his brother. Much less of a mess, if you will. This obviously made him a valuable asset to S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury, and so he ended up on the Avengers team. However, Gregory was also super smart, and was using his time working with S.H.I.E.L.D. to put certain plans into action that would allow him to take over control and eventually kind of rule the world, sort of. After Fury seemingly went rogue and Carol Danvers was also removed from the chessboard, Gregory was made the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and attempted to use his influence and nanite tech to cause chaos and war to erupt in other nations. Fortunately, he would be defeated by his brother Tony, who disabled his nanites with an EMP, allowing Thor to take him down. Still, for a time, Gregory was a pretty valuable member of the Avengers team, and later a formidable villain to them and to the Ultimates. And for that, he gets some bonus points. That's what I say. Gold Star Gregory Stark. That's what I call him. For evilness, I guess. Number 2. Tyrone Cash. Tyrone Cash was a fairly powerful version of the Hulk, and actually was the first Hulk to exist in the Ultimate Universe. He created the Hulk serum before his protege Bruce Banner was able to, and decided to use it on himself. This gave him massive strength, and he took the name Tyrone Cash, and decided to become a criminal, using his brilliant intellect to avoid capture for longer than a decade. Previously, he'd been known as the Scientist and as Banner's mentor, Professor Dr. Leonard Williams. Eventually, Cash was apprehended and forced to join the Avengers team, and after S.H.I.E.L.D. learned that he'd betrayed them, Fury had him executed. So of course, who's the most powerful? Who could it be? Number 1. Nick Fury. When it comes to the Avengers team, Nick Fury is like the Amanda Waller of it all, in comparison to the Ultimate Avengers DC counterpart, which would likely be the Suicide Squad. Nick Fury was the one to resurrect Project Avengers, and while he claimed this was done to hunt down the Red Skull, Captain America's villainous son in this reality, it is actually believed that Fury had orchestrated Red Skull's return in order to get his job back as director of S.H.I.E.L.D. and resurrect the old abandoned Avengers project. That's just so Nick Fury, I'm just saying. Nick Fury holds a lot of power not just as a master spy who often deals in secrets, but also because he was exposed to the super soldier serum and has influence over the rest of the Avengers team as their overall leader and organizer. He's just got a lot of power. He's also like got a million plans, so if you're like, oh, I know how I'll beat Nick Fury, he probably already has a plan for if you try to do that to him. That's how good he is.
Number 10. Charles Xavier. Professor X did die in this reality, but before that, he was a gifted telepath. The manifestation of his powers in the Ultimates reality is actually believed to have caused his hair loss. That's right, his powers are so powerful, they caused him to go bald. I love it. Charles became good friends with Eric in this reality, and the two would band together as partners to create the Brotherhood of Mutants. However, the two split ways after Magneto started to see humans as inferior to mutants, believing that mutant kind should actually rule the world. And in case you didn't know, that's what leads to Professor X's death. Number 9. Captain Britain. Captain Britain was the brother of the original one to hold that mantle, Brian Braddock. James Braddock Jr., Brian's brother, took up the mantle of Captain Britain after his brother ended up in a coma. He is considered to be slightly stronger than the original and would go on to try and help Thor fight against the Children of Tomorrow. Captain Britain was one of the few to survive that battle. He'd also end up later on serving on the Ultimates team. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more lists like it where we explore alternate realities, be sure to show us by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Daredevil. Matt has a story that is similar to his origins in 616, but is also unique in how much more personal his connections are to, well, pretty much everyone around him, and how much enemies and allies influenced his choices to become a hero and defined what being a hero means to him. Matt Murdock, like his 616 counterpart, was also blinded at a young age, but found his other senses enhanced. His father also died after refusing to cooperate in a fixed boxing match. However, in this reality, Kingpin was directly responsible for his father's murder. Like in the reality of 616, Daredevil's experience, training, and enhanced senses make him a gifted fighter. Number 7. Spider-Woman. In this reality, Jessica Drew has a completely different backstory. She is actually the clone of Peter Parker, made to be an exact copy of him, but female. As such, she has all of his memories. Initially, she was intended to be used as a government weapon, repurposed and trained as an agent, but she and the other Spider clones they made escaped. Jessica would go on to keep her memories, but separate herself from them and Peter, taking her own name and carving out her own life for herself, though still acting as a hero. At one point in time, she was a member of the Ultimates, much like how Jessica Drew of Earth 616 is a well-known member of the Avengers. Number 6. Colossus. A strong mutant on Earth 616 and in 1610. Initially, Pyotr Rasputin did not possess super strength as part of his power set, but was given a drug called Banshee to enhance his strength, as well as a job working for the Russian mafia. Eventually, he ended up joining the X-Men, though he would leave the team on a few separate occasions. He'd managed to hold off Scarlet Witch, save a submarine that not even the Ultimates were capable of saving, and defeat Proteus, David Xavier, Xavier's son, who threatened the entire world with violence, traveling around and targeting international landmarks the world over. Differences between Colossus of Earth 1610 and that of Earth 616 is that here he isn't inherently strong, as I said before, in his steel form, but needs Banshee to give him that boost. And he's also gay. He even for a time dates fellow mutant Northstar. Number 5. Jimmy Hudson. Jimmy Hudson is the son of Wolverine. He also inherited his claws, superior senses, and regenerative healing factor. Like his dad, it's believed that his powers may actually be based in survival as opposed to just healing, with James being seen as adapting to survive injury or harsh environments as needed. Unlike Wolverine, Jimmy can choose to coat his claws in metal, as this is actually part of his power set, and it's believed that only his claws end up being coated, not the rest of his skeleton. Jimmy was a crucial member of the mutant resistance, which fought against Sentinel and militia attacks that threatened to wipe out the mutants. In the end, the mutants were victorious and were given a choice of going to live on their own piece of land in Utah or taking a cure for their mutation. Jimmy was one of the few mutants who decided to keep his powers. Number 4, Storm. Initially in the Ultimate Universe, Storm didn't have great control over her powers, and mostly got by stealing cars, but after the X-Men took her in, she learned how to control and even master her powers, allowing her to become one of the most fearsome and powerful mutants around. Ultimate Storm is so cool. Storm is so fast, she has been shown to be able to catch people who are falling in midair, dodge bullets, and even keep pace with a plane. Impressive considering planes on average travel at speeds over 540 miles per hour or over 870 kilometers per hour. That's fast. She's also likely not someone you want to tangle with, as even when she takes hits in battles, she tends to keep fighting or instinctively strike back. Using her lightning storm and weather control powers, she's also managed to defeat multiple opponents with one single attack, whether they be Sentinel opponents or human opponents, and in some cases, even killing them. I think at one point she kills like 11 people at once, and it's just like, okay. Don't mess with Storm. Got it. I mean, I already knew that before from her 616, but now I really know. Number 3, Jean Grey. In Ultimates, it almost seems there is nothing Jean can't do. Before she joined the X-Men, she was in a mental institution as the manifestation of her powers made her seem insane. However, Professor X would save Jean and recruit her on his X-Men team, with her being the second member. In the Ultimate Universe, we have seen Jean become possessed by what she thought was a cosmic entity referred to as the Phoenix God, and almost lose control and her sanity. The biggest problem with Jean is similar to that of her Earth 616 counterpart. Immense power threatens to basically break her mind, or at least take over her sense of sanity. In the comics, Jean is not only a skilled telepath, and was even able to read Wolverine's mind, something Professor X believed wasn't even possible, but she also happens to, weirdly enough, be a skilled doctor and surgeon as well, although I'm pretty sure she doesn't have any medical license. Say what? Jean was even shown to be capable of connecting and tapping into the multiverse to reach out and see various versions of herself. Basically, she can do everything, because being a telepath is crazy powerful. Number 2, Magneto. Obviously, one of the most powerful mutants out there has to be Magneto, not just for the powers of magnetism that he wields, but also just for his influence. Magneto was the mastermind behind Ultimatum. I suppose I should use the term mastermind lightly there, as Ultimatum in general is not really seen very favorably in most fans' eyes. I admit it was controversial and caused a lot of perhaps needless death. In fact, I would say it was needless death. But you have to acknowledge just how much of a threat it painted Magneto out to be. While I'm not sure about Magneto basically committing genocide as a victim of one himself, you have to admit that this made him one of the most fearsome characters in all of the Ultimate Universe. And for Magneto, there is power in fear, even though oddly enough, it is usually fear that tends to power the hate that he often stands up against. Number 1, Kitty Pryde. One of the most powerful characters as a leader especially. She ends up becoming the ruler of the mutant tent nation that the mutants dub Utopia. This is a portion of land in Utah that the mutants who choose not to accept the cure are given. In fact, all those who refuse to take the cure are forced to live there. Kitty ends up fighting a war against Jean Grey in the Ultimate Universe as well, because Jean wants Kitty to join the mutant nation that she was put in charge of ruling after the death of Zorn with an X, Xi'an. But Kitty refuses to bring their people together. Kitty is such a good leader, she even steps down from her title as the leader of Utopia to help ease the target on her own people's backs because of her and Jean's conflict. Kitty and Utopia would end up winning that war, and Kitty would also play a crucial role in defeating Galactus as well. Also, I gotta say, that whole World War X thing, it was pretty weird. Number 10, Kraven the Hunter. Kraven on Earth 1610 is actually the star of a show, following him as he hunts down dangerous and exotic animals. He planned on hunting Spider-Man to improve his show's ratings, but was exposed as a fraud when Spider-Man handily defeated him with one punch. Obsessed with getting revenge on Spider-Man for costing him his reputation, his job, and apparently his wife, Kraven experimented on himself, transforming himself into a lion-like monster. Eventually, he would go on to join the Sinister Six and continue to try to fight and kill Spider-Man. Kraven is a skilled tracker, and after his experimentation had superhuman levels of strength, speed, and endurance, becoming a much more fearsome opponent. Much more fearsome. Number 9. Prowler. Prowler is an interesting villain because when Miles Morales was moved over to Earth 616 after the destruction of Earth 1610 and the amalgamation of the Marvel Universe into Battleworld, Aaron Davis, Miles' uncle, also survived. Aaron Davis used to be partners in crime with Miles' father, his brother, Jefferson. But after the birth of his son, Jefferson decided to go on the straight and narrow, while Aaron continued on with his criminal activities. Initially, Aaron died in Earth 1610 after attempting to blackmail and then kill his nephew, knowing of his true identity as Spider-Man. However, he also found himself returned to life when Miles was moved over to Earth 616. He woke up in bed as though his death had never happened. He would end up becoming a criminal again, recruiting the Sinister Six and fighting against his nephew once more. His antagonism would actually inspire the formation of the Champions. Eventually, though, Aaron would attempt to also give up his criminal ways, being convinced by his nephew that he could do better. And friends, if you love villains as much as I love villains, please show that love by giving this video a thumbs up. Seriously, when you hit that thumbs up or when you click the subscribe, it really does help us out, so thank you for doing it. Number 8, Black Widow. Black Widow was almost one of the most successful villains around. She played the role of hero so well, no one saw her betrayal coming, not even her fiancé Tony Stark. Yep, in this world, Iron Man and Black Widow end up romantically together. However, it's later revealed that this was all part of Black Widow's plan to betray the Avengers and steal Stark's fortune. Mwahaha. Instead of redeeming herself and becoming a hero, Black Widow here remains a villain through and through, and is just pretending to be a hero. She even kills Jarvis! Oh no! But in the end, Stark is able to use the nanotech in her blood, which allows her to control the suit that he made for her as a wedding gift to neutralize Black Widow. Though not in time to save Jarvis, sadly. Black Widow would get hers in the end when Hawkeye found out where she was being kept and killed her as revenge for her orchestrating the death of his family and his own capture and torture. Yeah, Black Widow is really bad in the Ultimate Universe. Number 7, Colonel. The Colonel was Abdul Al-Rahman. He was a super soldier just like Captain America and was actually a hero to his own nation. He was part of the Liberators, the same group of villains that Black Widow was allied with. Abdul's powers were comparable to Captain America, as he was also a super soldier. In fact, believed to be the first successful super soldier since the creation of Cap. The Liberators were considered a group of villains by the Ultimates and the USA, but were in reality a multinational group of superpowered beings who banded together in their hopes to even the playing field for the rest of the world by destroying the Ultimates. The depiction of these villains was extremely political, problematic, and even at times racist. But if you consider his motivations and his backstory, Abdul was actually a pretty cool character. To add likely to his evil but badass appearance, he also fought with what appeared to be a double-bladed, well, a lightsaber. Energy blades, I think they're called, that looked very similar to Darth Maul's. Because, you know, Darth Maul's a bad guy, so how do we make Abdul look like a bad guy? Give him the same thing that Darth Maul fights with. What is happening? It's the Star Wars Marvel superhero crossover that none of us necessarily asked for, but there you go. Number 6, the Wasp. When it comes to Janet Van Dyne, you might just think of her untimely and gruesome end in Ultimates, eaten by the Blob as she was, but there is a lot more to her character than just that very graphic death. Janet was also for a time the leader of the Ultimates after they decided to split off from S.H.I.E.L.D. She was chosen as leader because she was considered one of the most experienced members. Many underestimated her because her abilities were about her shrinking as opposed to growing to ginormous sizes, which made enemies consider her weak and insignificant, but she would prove to them just how powerful she was. Her untimely end did not really seem deserved, and fortunately it was undone when the Maker resurrected the alternate world over 1610. Number 5, Cyclops. If you thought Magneto was OP in this universe, Cyclops was technically the one to put an end to him. Here, Scott Summers was the one responsible for using his optic blast to completely destroy Magneto after he himself had killed billions, including the person who had brought the X-Men together, Professor X. Cyclops in the comics was also for a time a member of Magneto's Brotherhood. In this reality, Magneto even considered him as a potential heir when it came to a leadership role. However, Scott would eventually betray Magneto after he he learned of his plans to attack and destroy Washington, D.C. using reprogrammed Sentinels. Number 4. Jimmy Hudson. In the ultimate reality, Jimmy Hudson is the son of Wolverine and Magneto's wife, Magda. Jimmy would only learn upon his powers first manifesting that Wolverine was his dad. In a message left for him, Wolverine would specifically stress that Jimmy not really focus on who his real mother was or on his past, but continue to move forward and to respect the Hudsons as his parents who had taken him in and raised him on Wolverine's behalf. His powers are similar to Wolverine. He has a regenerative healing factor and bone claws. Jimmy can also coat his claws at will with a metallic substance. Jimmy has bonded with one of the symbiotic aliens known as the Poisons, but seems to maintain control of himself even while bonded with the Poison. So he's basically got like a little symbiote alien pal, but not a symbiote like how Venom's a symbiote, not from Clinter. Number 3. Machine Man. Danny Ketch was originally a spy and operative that was recruited to be a part of Nick Fury's Howling Commandos after the dissolution of the Ultimates. He would end up facing the global threat of the Galactus Swarm and MODOK in the Maker's City of Tomorrow. Danny would sacrifice himself to merge with the Swarm in order to free the captives of the city. Once merged, he then also prevented MODOK from escaping and blew up the city in order to defeat the enemy. It turned out, however, that Danny had survived with his consciousness being transferred to nanite technology that reappeared following this explosion. Aided by Agent Phil Coulson, the nanites were used to recreate a version of Danny Ketch, who was then dubbed the Machine Man. Number 2. Storm. Storm was invited to join the X-Men team by Jean Grey, who managed to save her from the police who were attempting to apprehend her because she had stolen a car. Initially, Storm had attempted to ditch Jean, thinking that she was working for Magneto, but when she learned of Professor X and his more noble mutant cause, she agreed to join. Her powers were more unpredictable and hard for Storm to control initially, with her not necessarily being established as one who had been worshipped as a goddess. However, over time training alongside the X-Men with Professor X, she would become a formidable fighter, hero, and X-Men member. Also, pretty much in every reality, Storm is just super OP. Number 1. Jean Grey. Just like in the main continuity of Earth 616, Jean is considered one of the most powerful characters around. Here, however, at least she has some pretty big problems to wrestle with on top of all of her power. When her powers first manifested, others thought that she was insane, which meant that Professor X ended up meeting with her and recruiting her from a mental institution. Initially, Jean also wasn't even sure if the Phoenix Force was real or not. Was it some intergalactic god, some manifestation of her own powers which were growing and expanding, or a demon seeking to destroy the planet? Her mental health has always been the counterpoint to her power, as Jean questions her own sanity in the Ultimate Universe, and yet she still wields godlike power. A deadly combination, but of course, Jean does her best to wield it wisely.